There are lines you don't cross in this world. Not if you want to live. The desert sun glints off, shattered glass scattered around a classic blue Ford F-150. Inside, the seats are slashed open, the dashboard splintered, a brass shell casing sits on the torn leather. A message clearer than any words. Leave or join him. 15 years of dust gathered on a murder file while corruption spread like cancer through a small town. 15 years of combat zones hardened the hands now tracing the jagged edges of that broken window. Some would call it a warning, others a threat. She calls it a declaration of war. They never asked who she became in those distant battlefields. Never wondered what tactical precision looks like when it comes home-focused and inevitable, as a bullet seeking its mark. They assumed the sheriff's daughter would break like her father's truck. But in the spaces between heartbeats and the cold calculation behind her eyes lies a simple truth they're about to learn. Some people are born for vengeance. She trained for it. The dust billowed behind Sarah Colton's weathered blue Ford F-150 as she crossed the county line into Pine Ridge. 15 years. 15 long years since she'd seen the wooden welcome sign with its faded painting of pine trees against a mountain backdrop. The truck's engine produced a familiar grumble as she downshifted, a sound that transported her back to those driving lessons with her father in these same hills. Home sweet home, she murmured to herself, her voice lacking conviction. At 38, Sarah carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent most of her adult life in uniform. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, revealing a thin scar that traced from behind her right ear, down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq had left their marks, some visible, others buried deeper. The F-150 had seen better days. The once vibrant blue paint was now sun-bleached, and rust crept along the wheel wells like an invasive species. But Sarah wouldn't trade it for anything. It was the last gift her father had given her before he was killed, 1 week before she shipped out for basic training. Sheriff Michael Colton gunned down in what the official report called a robbery gone wrong at Donovan's convenience store. Sarah's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. She'd never believed that story. Her father had been too careful, too skilled for a random thief to get the drop on him. But at 18, grief-stricken and days away from starting her military service, she hadn't been in a position to ask questions. Now she was home, honorably discharged after a final mission in Afghanistan had gone sideways, leaving 4 of her team members dead, and Sarah with a medical discharge. A chest full of medals she kept in a shoebox and nightmares that made sleep a battlefield of its own. Pine Ridge emerged from behind the bend nestled in the valley below population 2786. According to the sign, though, Sarah suspected that number hadn't been updated in years. From this distance, it looked unchanged, the church steeple still the tallest structure. Main Street cutting through the center like a spine with residential neighborhoods and scattered farms radiating outward. As she drove into town, however, the differences began to accumulate. Donovan's was now a Quick Mart with garish neon signs. The hardware store where she'd bought her first pocket knife was boarded up. 3 storefronts on Main Street stood empty, their windows plastered with faded for lease signs, and there was something else, something in the atmosphere that her military-honed instincts registered immediately. Tension, the kind that hung in the air like the static before a thunderstorm. Sarah pulled into Mabel's House Diner, one of the few establishments that looked exactly as she remembered it, right down to the neon open sign with the flickering N. She needed coffee information and a moment to recalibrate before heading to her father's house. Her house now, she supposed, left to her in his will and maintained by a property management company all these years while she was deployed. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Several heads turned toward her, a reflex in small towns where new faces were rare, then quickly turned away when they registered a stranger. All except one, an elderly woman behind the counter, whose weathered face cracked into a smile of recognition. "As I live and breathe," the woman said, setting down a coffee pot. Sarah Colton back from the wars. Sarah's tension eased a fraction. "Hello, Mabel. Still making the best coffee in 3 counties. 4 counties, now, honey. Competition went under last year." Mabel came around the counter, arms outstretched. Sarah accepted the embrace, stiffly unaccustomed to casual physical contact after years of military distance. "Sit yourself down. Coffee's on the house for the sheriff's girl." Sarah slid into a booth by the window, positioning herself with her back to the wall and a clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot, habits that had kept her alive in combat zones and seemed impossible to break in civilian life. Mabel returned with coffee and a slice of apple pie. "Didn't ask if you wanted it because I know you do." your daddy's favorite, and the mention of her father caused a familiar constriction in Sarah's chest. How long have you known I was coming back? Got the call from Gloria Wilson last week, said you'd finally decided to come home and see about selling Michael's place. Sarah frowned slightly. News travels fast. I only finalized my discharge a month ago. Nothing travels faster than gossip in Pine Ridge, honey, you know that. Mabel's expression sobered. This town's changed, Sarah, not for the better. I noticed. What happened to Harlan's Hardware and Miller's Pharmacy? Mabel glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. Economy, they say. But that's not the half of it. We've got problems here that Michael would have never allowed. She straightened up as the bell jingled again. You should talk to Gloria. She knows more than me, and she's been keeping your daddy's house ready just in case. A group of 3 men entered the diner, their appearance setting off immediate alarm bells in Sarah's mind, muscled tattoos crawling up their necks, eyes that evaluated the room with predatory assessment. One wore a leather vest with a scorpion embroidered on the back. They took a booth across the diner, but not before the leader. A bald man with a neatly trimmed goatee noticed Sarah's gaze and held it for a beat too long. Who are they? Sarah asked quietly once Mabel returned to refill her coffee. Trouble, Mabel said simply. The Scorpions moved in about 3 years ago. Started small, just motorcycle enthusiasts, they said. Now they're into everything. Drugs coming up from the border, protection rackets. Sheriff Rayburn says his hands are tied without evidence. Rayburn, what happened to Deputy Martinez? Killed in a gas explosion at his cabin 5 years back. Mabel's voice dropped further. Some say it wasn't no accident, but nobody asks questions around here anymore. Sarah's jaw tightened. Martinez had been her father's right-hand man, a good cop with a better moral compass. The idea that he died under suspicious circumstances only deepened her unease. And Rayburn, she pressed, William Rayburn, transferred in from Tucson after Martinez, talks a big game about law and order, but Mabel shrugged expressively. Results speak for themselves. Sarah fell silent, absorbing this information while observing the Scorpions from her peripheral vision. They were making too much noise, taking up too much space. The behavior of men who were used to intimidating others without consequence. After finishing her pie and paying despite Mabel's protests, Sarah stepped out into the afternoon sun. Her truck sat waiting a piece of her father's legacy that had followed her through multiple deployments in spirit and finally back to Pine Ridge in physical form. She ran her hand along the hood, feeling the sun-warmed metal beneath her palm. The paint was chipped, the bumper slightly dented from an incident outside Kandahar involving a stubborn goat. But it was hers, the one possession she truly valued. The drive to her father's house took less than 10 minutes. Pine Ridge wasn't big, and the sheriff's residence sat on the outskirts, a modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and a detached garage. Sarah parked in the gravel driveway and sat for a moment, steeling herself. The house looked smaller than she remembered, but well-maintained. Fresh paint on the shutters, flower beds, weeded lawn mowed. Gloria Wilson had clearly taken her caretaking duties seriously. Sarah grabbed her duffel bag from the truck bed and approached the front door, fishing out the key that had been mailed to her upon her father's death. A key she'd carried with her across multiple continents, never quite ready to use until now. The lock turned smoothly. As Sarah pushed the door open, the scent hit her immediately. Furniture polish, old books, and faintly beneath it all, her father's aftershave. Impossible after all these years, yet somehow present like a ghost lingering in the air molecules. We stepped inside, letting the duffel bag drop to the hardwood floor. The interior was frozen in time, her father's reading chair still positioned by the stone fireplace. His collection of Western paperbacks arranged on the built-in shelves, the antique grandfather clock still ticking in the corner. Gloria had preserved it all as if expecting Michael Colton to walk through the door, Lauren any moment hang his hat on the rack and sink into his chair with a sigh. After a long day of upholding the law, Sarah moved through the house like a visitor in a museum, touching surfaces, gingerly half expecting alarms to sound. Her father's study was similarly untouched desk organized with military precision case files neatly stacked, though presumably emptied of confidential material, service revolver conspicuously absent. The wall held photographs charting her progression from gap-toothed child to solemn-faced high school graduate to uniformed soldier. In the center, larger than the others, was a photo of her and her father on her 18th birthday, just days before his death. His arm was around her shoulders, pride evident in his smile, while teenage Sarah looked toward the camera with determination in her eyes, already mentally preparing for the military career that would begin the following week. Upstairs, her childhood bedroom awaited the twin bed made up with fresh linens. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of her mother dead from cancer when Sarah was just 7, her smile eerily similar to Sarah's own. "I'm home, Mom," she whispered, touching the frame lightly. Not sure for how long, after unpacking her few possessions and taking a shower in the bathroom that still held her father's preferred brand of soap, Sarah changed into fresh jeans and a plain black t-shirt. The house felt like a time capsule and she needed air. Needed to reacquaint herself with the town without the filter of childhood memories. The evening air had cooled considerably as Sarah drove back toward town. She had no particular destination in mind, but muscle memory guided her toward Joe's Tavern, the place where locals gathered when Mabel's closed for the night. It had been her father's off-duty sanctuary where he'd listened to locals' concerns without the formality of the sheriff's office. Joe's looked much the same weathered timber exterior, neon beer signs glowing in the windows, the gravel parking lot filled with a mix of trucks and sedans. Sarah parked the F-150 and steeled herself before entering. Inside the tavern was moderately busy for a weeknight. A jukebox played Merle Haggard in the corner, competing with the click of pool balls and the murmur of conversations. Sarah felt eyes tracking her as she made her come to the bar, the military bearing in her posture marking her as an outsider. Despite her civilian clothes, most turned away after a curious glance, but she registered a few double takes of recognition. "Bourbon neat," she told the bartender, a heavy-set man she didn't recognize. "You got it." He slid the drink toward her, new in town. "Just returned," Sarah corrected, taking a measured sip. "Military?" he asked, nodding toward her posture. The bartender seemed about to ask another question when a commotion erupted near the pool tables. Sarah turned to see one of the scorpions from the diner, the bald one with the goatee looming over a younger man who couldn't have been more than 25. "I said double or nothing," the scorpion growled, grabbing the younger man's shirt. "I don't have it, Marco," the younger man stammered. "I can get it tomorrow, I swear." "Not good enough." Marco's fist clenched tighter in the fabric. "You either pay now or we take a walk outside and discuss alternative payment arrangements." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she observed the dynamics of the room. No one was intervening. Several patrons had suddenly found their drinks fascinating, while others had shifted away from the confrontation. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern of intimidation that had become normalized. "This happened often?" she asked the bartender quietly. "Often enough," he replied, his expression carefully neutral. "Best not to get involved." Sarah took another sip of her bourbon, feeling the familiar cold clarity settling over her, the same mental state that had guided her through countless high-stress operations. Her rational mind told her to stay put, to observe and gather intelligence before acting, but her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." The young man was now being dragged toward the door, his protest growing more panicked. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed tavern. Marco paused, turning toward her with exaggerated slowness. "Excuse me." Sarah remained at the bar, her posture relaxed but alert, one foot hooked around the bar stool rung, hands visible, non-threatening but ready. "I said I wouldn't do that if I were you. Whatever he owes, it can't be worth the trouble." The scorpion released his victim and stalked towards Sarah, his two companions flanking him. The young man wisely retreated to a safe distance. "You must be new here," Marco said, stopping a few feet from her. "So I'll explain how things work. Mind your own business and you won't have problems." Sarah took another sip of bourbon, seeming utterly unimpressed. "Is that how it works now? Interesting. What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just observing that standards have slipped in Pine Ridge." Marco's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" She set her glass down and turned to face him fully. "Colton." "Sarah Colton?" A ripple of recognition moved through the room. Marco's expression shifted from anger to wary interest. "Sheriff Colton's kid. He said, heard you were in the Army, or something." "Or something," Sarah agreed mildly. Marco assessed her, clearly recalculating. "Your daddy's been dead a long time. His name doesn't carry weight anymore." "I'm not looking to throw my weight around," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact. "Just suggesting that public assaults might attract attention you don't want. You threatening me, advising you professional courtesy." Her choice of words wasn't lost on him. Marco's eyes flicked to his companions, then back to Sarah. "You picked the wrong town to come home to. Colton, things have changed." "So I've noticed." For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Marco stepped back, gesturing to his companions. "We're done here for tonight." He leaned closer to Sarah. "But you'd be smart to stay out of our business, military or not, you're outnumbered." "Quantity has a quality all its own," Sarah acknowledged, "but quality has its advantages too." Marco's jaw tightened, but he backed away, pointing at the young man who had caused the altercation. "Tomorrow, Ryan Cash, or else." With that, he and his companions departed, the tavern door swinging shut behind them. The collective exhale seemed to pass through the room, followed by a gradual resumption of conversation. The young man Ryan approached Sarah hesitantly. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, though gratitude showed through his fear. "They don't forget." "Neither do I," Sarah replied, turning back to her drink. "What's their game?" "Anything that pays." Started with protection, money from businesses expanded to drugs, loan sharking. Ryan glanced nervously at the door. "Marco's not even the one to worry about. He's just muscle. And the brains," Ryan shook his head. "I don't know. Nobody knows for sure, just that they've got protection from somewhere high up." He extended his hand. "Ryan Keegan. My dad owned the hardware store before, well before." Sarah shook his hand. "Before the Scorpions. Before he couldn't make protection payments and had a heart attack while hiking." Ryan's voice remained steady, but rage simmered beneath the surface. "Sheriff Rayburn said there was no evidence of foul play." Sarah absorbed this, adding it to her mental catalog of Pine Ridge's transformation. "I'm sorry about your father." Ryan nodded, then lowered his voice. "Word of advice, be careful. The Scorpions have eyes everywhere, and they don't like complications." After Ryan left, Sarah finished her drink and paid her tab. As she walked to her truck, she could feel the weight of hidden watchers. Pine Ridge had always been a town where everyone knew everyone's business, but this felt different, predatory rather than merely curious. The F-150's engine roared to life, a comforting sound in the darkness. Sarah drove slowly through town, reacquainting herself with streets that seemed both familiar and foreign. New buildings had sprung up on the outskirts, a strip mall, a car wash, a payday loan establishment with garish lighting, but the heart of town was withering with more empty storefronts than she remembered. She pulled into the sheriff's station parking lot and sat observing the building where her father had spent most of his waking hours. The lights were on, indicating someone was working late. For a moment, she considered going inside, introducing herself to whoever had replaced her father. But instinct held her back. Better to observe first, understand the terrain before engaging. Sarah returned to her father's house, her house now, and secured it with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to hostile territory. Additional locks on doors and windows. Furniture arranged to create choke points. Escape routes mentally mapped. Only then did she allow herself to sink into her father's reading chair, the leather creaking beneath her weight. On the side table sat a photo album she hadn't noticed earlier. Sarah opened it, finding newspaper clippings about her father's cases interspersed with photos of him in uniform. The final page held the article about his death. The headline, "Stark Sheriff Killed in Convenience Store Robbery." The accompanying photo showed emergency vehicles outside Donovan's crime scene, tape fluttering in the wind. Sarah stared at the image, the familiar mixture of grief and rage churning inside her. The official story had never sat right with her, but she'd been 18, shell-shocked, and days away from basic training. By the time she'd been in a position to ask questions. Years had passed, evidence had been filed away, and witnesses had moved on. Sleep proved elusive that night. Sarah lay in her childhood bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, settling her mind, cycling through everything she'd learned: the Scorpions, Sheriff Rayburn Martinez's suspicious death, Ryan Keegan's father. All pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known needed solving until she'd returned home. One broke. Sarah finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake 2 hours later by the sound of a vehicle pulling into her driveway. She was instantly alert, reaching for the combat knife she kept within arm's reach before remembering where she was. Cautiously, she approached the window. A sedan had parked behind her truck. An elderly woman emerged, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Gloria Wilson. Sarah recognized with relief, her father's closest neighbor and apparently the caretaker of his property. During Sarah's absence, Sarah dressed quickly and went downstairs, opening the front door just as Gloria reached the porch. "I was hoping you'd sleep in," Gloria said by way of greeting. "Lord knows you've earned it." "Old habits," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let her enter. "Thank you for taking care of the house all these years." Gloria waved away the gratitude as she headed for the kitchen. Michael would have done the same for me. Besides, someone had to keep it ready for when you decided to come home. I'm not sure I'm staying, Sarah admitted, following her. I just needed closure, I guess. Gloria set the basket on the counter, revealing homemade muffins still warm from the oven. Closure's hard to come by in Pine Ridge these days. She gave Sarah an appraising look. You've grown up strong just like your father said you would, but you've got shadows in your eyes, girl. Occupational hazard, Sarah said, accepting a muffin. Mabel says you might be able to fill me in on what's been happening here. Gloria's face tightened. Mabel should watch what she says in that diner. Walls have ears these days. She gestured toward the back porch. Let's sit outside. They settled in the twin rocking chairs that had been fixtures on the porch since Sarah's childhood. Gloria moved hers slightly, positioning herself so she could see the road approach. It started about 5 years ago. She began, her voice low despite the privacy of their location. Martinez was getting close to something. He'd been investigating unusual activity around the old lumber mill, said he had evidence of drug manufacturing. Then his cabin exploded gas leak officially. A month later, Rayburn transferred in from Tucson. She paused. Things changed quick after that. The Scorpions moved in, starting with a legitimate motorcycle club, then expanding businesses that didn't pay protection, had accidents. People who asked questions had worse accidents. Like Ryan Keegan's father. Gloria looked sharply at Sarah. You've been busy in less than 24 hours. I ran into a situation at Joe's last night, already making friends with the Scorpions. That was fast even for Michael Colton's daughter, Gloria sighed. Yes, like David Keegan, and at least 3 others that I know of, natural causes or accidents, according to the official reports. And no one's fought back, called in the state police or the FBI. With what evidence Rayburn controls the investigations, the mayor's office is either intimidated or compensated. And folks here, Gloria gestured toward the town, they're scared, Sarah. They've watched what happens to those who speak up. Sarah absorbed this feeling about cold anger building inside her. Her father had dedicated his life to protecting Pine Ridge, only for his legacy to be dismantled within years of his death. What about my father's case? Was that really a robbery? Gloria's hesitation told Sarah everything before she even spoke. The timing was always suspicious. Michael had been unusually quiet in the weeks before, said he was working on something big, but wouldn't tell me details. Then suddenly he's shot during a robbery where nothing substantial was taken. You think it was connected to whatever Martinez was investigating later? I can't prove anything, Gloria said carefully. But your father wasn't the type to let himself get surprised by some random thief. And the way things developed after, she shook her head. Too many coincidences. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing. I need to see the case files on my father's death. Good luck with that. Rayburn keeps sensitive files under lock and key. There are ways, Gloria studied her, then nodded slowly. You're not just here to sell the house, are you? Sarah turned, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. I thought I was. Now I'm not so sure. Michael would be proud. Gloria rose, gathering her basket. But he'd also tell you to be careful. Whatever got him killed is still here. Sarah. And it's had years to entrench itself. After Gloria left, Sarah spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly, looking for any clues her father might have left behind. Michael Colton had been methodical to a fault, cataloging everything from household expenses to fishing catches in neatly labeled notebooks. If he'd been investigating something significant before his death, there might be traces. The study yielded nothing beyond what she'd already seen. The basement contained boxes of holiday decorations and old sports equipment, but nothing relevant. Sarah was about to give up when she remembered her father's habit of hiding important items in plain sight. The bookshelf in the living room held his collection of Western paperbacks. Louis L'Amour, Zane Grey, Max Brand. Sarah ran her fingers along the spines, recalling how he'd read them to her as bedtime stories, altering the more violent passages for her young ears. One book was slightly out of alphabetical order. A L'Amour novel titled The Broken Gun. Sarah pulled it from the shelf, finding it heavier than expected. Inside, the pages had been hollowed out, creating a cavity that contained a small USB drive and a handwritten note in her father's precise script. For Sarah, if needed, trust few. Sarah stared at the items, her pulse quickening. Her father had prepared for the possibility of his death, had left evidence for her specifically. But she'd been gone for 15 years, never returning. even for brief visits or military deployments, providing a convenient excuse to avoid the pain associated with Pine Ridge. She pocketed the USB drive, resolving to examine its contents later when she could ensure privacy. For now, she needed to re-establish her presence in town, observe the scorpions in their natural habitat, and perhaps most importantly, get a measure of Sheriff Rayburn. Sarah spent the afternoon driving around Pine Ridge and the surrounding area, reacquainting herself with geography while noting changes. The lumber mill Gloria had mentioned sat abandoned on the eastern outskirts, its buildings deteriorating behind chain-link fencing. From a distance, it appeared unused, but Sarah observed fresh tire tracks leading to a rear entrance worth investigating later. As evening approached, she parked near the sheriff's office, timing her arrival for shift change at precisely 600 p.m. Deputies began emerging, heading for the parking lot with the universal body language of law enforcement, ending a shift part relief. Part continued. Vigilance, Sarah recognized none of them. Her father's department had been small himself. Martinez and 3 deputies. These men were younger, with a hardness to their expressions that spoke of a different kind of policing than Michael Colton had practiced. Finally, a man emerged who could only be Sheriff Rayburn, mid-50s tall with a military-style crew cut gone silver at the temples. He carried himself with authority, his uniform immaculate, the star on his chest polished to a high shine. There was nothing overtly sinister in his appearance, yet Sarah felt an instinctive distrust, the same feeling she'd developed for certain Afghan allies who smiled while providing intelligence that sent patrols into ambushes. Rayburn climbed into a department SUV and pulled out of the lot. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed at a discreet distance. If Rayburn noticed the tail, he gave no indication as he drove through town and pulled into the parking lot of an upscale steakhouse that hadn't existed during Sarah's youth. She parked across the street and watched as Rayburn entered the restaurant. Through the large front windows, she could see him join a table where 3 men waited, one in an expensive suit who Sarah guessed to be the mayor, another who appeared to be a business owner from Main Street, and the third a lean man with the unmistakable bearing of someone in charge of the Scorpions, though. Not anyone she'd seen at Joe's the previous night. The dinner meeting lasted over 2 hours. Sarah observed from her truck, noting how Rayburn deferred subtly to the Scorpion leader, how conversation flowed freely with alcohol, but paused whenever waitstaff approached. It wasn't proof of corruption, but it certainly indicated relationships that a sheriff in a town plagued by a criminal gang shouldn't maintain. As the meeting broke up, Sarah slipped away before Rayburn could spot her vehicle. She drove back to her father's house, mind churning with possibilities. The USB drive burned in her pocket, but she needed a secure way to access it. Her own laptop had been damaged during her hasty departure from Afghanistan, and using a public computer was out of the question. The solution came in the form of a second-hand electronics store she'd spotted on her drive around town. The following morning, Sarah purchased a basic laptop with cash, giving a false name when the clerk asked for customer details. Back at the house, she set up a secure browsing environment before inserting the USB drive. The contents were encrypted, requiring a password. Sarah tried several combinations related to her father before recalling the significance of the broken gun. It had been the first Western he'd ever read to her on her 7th birthday after her mother's death. She typed "Broken Gun 1982" and was rewarded with access. The drive contained dozens of files, surveillance notes, financial records, photographs. Michael Colton had been investigating a drug manufacturing and distribution network operating out of Pine Ridge with connections to Mexican cartels. His notes indicated he'd traced ownership of several shell companies to prominent local figures, including then-Deputy Rayburn, who had worked in Pine Ridge briefly before transferring to Tucson. Most disturbingly, her father had documented meetings between Rayburn and a man identified only as Scorpion Prime, presumably the leader Sarah had observed at dinner the previous night. The evidence suggested Rayburn had been corrupt long before becoming sheriff and had likely engineered his return to Pine Ridge after Michael's death. The final entry, dated 3 days before her father was killed, was chilling in its prescience. Evidence compiled, meeting state prosecutor Thursday, saw increasingly nervous, unusual patrol patterns near my roots. If anything happens, the complete file is ready with J.M. Martinez, who had died in a gas explosion 5 years later. Sarah closed the laptop. Her suspicions confirmed her father had been assassinated to prevent him from exposing a drug operation, and Martinez had likely met the same fate when he continued the investigation. The robbery story had been a cover. The convenient timing of Rayburn's arrival. No coincidence. She was still processing this when her phone rang, a local number she didn't recognize. Colton, she answered cautiously. Sarah, it's Bobby Henderson. The name took a moment to register a childhood friend who had followed her father into law enforcement. Heard you were back in town. News travels fast, Sarah replied neutrally. Small town. Listen, I'm deputy sheriff now. Thought maybe we could catch up. For old time's sake. Sarah hesitated. Bobby had been close to her father, had even lived with them briefly during his parents' divorce. If anyone in the department might be trustworthy, it would be him. But caution prevailed. Sure, Mabel's for lunch. Perfect noon. I'll be there. After hanging up, Sarah secured the laptop and USB drive in a hiding place, different from where her father had concealed it. Then she headed out to run errands, maintaining the appearance of someone simply settling a deceased relative's affairs. At the post office, the clerk recognized her immediately. Sarah Colton, heard you were back. Sorry about your dad. He was a good man. The best. Sarah agreed, accepting the mail that had accumulated in her name, mostly official correspondence regarding her discharge and veterans benefits. You staying long? Haven't decided yet. Sarah kept her tone casual. Just seeing to the house for now. Well, we could use some of your father's kind around here again, the clerk said, lowering his voice. Things aren't right in Pine Ridge these days. Sarah nodded noncommittally and left a pair of eyes tracking her progress down Main Street. The F-150 waited faithfully in front of the feed store where she'd parked it, a piece of her father's legacy that had followed her through multiple deployments in spirit and finally back to Pine Ridge in physical form. As she approached the truck, however, she noticed something wrong. The driver's side window was shattered glass glittering on the pavement. The interior had been ransacked, glove compartment emptied, seat cushions / dashboard splintered where someone had tried to pry out the radio. Sarah stood utterly still, absorbing the violation. The truck had been her father's pride and joy, maintained meticulously for years before he'd gifted it to her. More than transportation, it represented their connection, a physical link to the man who'd raised her alone after her mother's death. A note had been left on the steering wheel, weighted down with a brass shell casing. Leave or join him. Cold fury replaced shock. Sarah had faced Taliban fighters, Iraqi insurgents, and warlords with private armies. She had led teams through hostile territory, had made life-or-death decisions under fire. This pathetic intimidation attempt was amateur hour. Problem with your vehicle, ma'am. Sarah turned to find Sheriff Rayburn standing behind her, expression professionally concerned, though his eyes remained coldly evaluative. Vandalism, she replied, keeping her tone even. Someone doesn't appreciate classic American craftsmanship. Shame don't see many of these old models in such good condition. Rayburn studied the damage. I'll have a deputy take a report, though, without witnesses. He let the implication hang. I understand. Small-town resources are limited. Sarah met his gaze directly. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Sarah Colton. William Rayburn. He extended his hand, which Sarah shook briefly. Michael's daughter, Army, right? That's right. Thank you for your service. The phrase was delivered with practiced smoothness. Your father was a fine lawman. Big shoes to fill. So I've heard. Rayburn gestured toward the truck. Any idea who might have done this? Make any enemies. Ready. I've barely been in town 24 hours, Sarah replied. Though I did have an encounter at Joe's last night. Some gentleman with scorpion imagery seemed upset about my intervention in their business discussion. Rayburn's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The Scorpions motorcycle club that's had some issues. I'll look into it, but they're usually more subtle than this. Subtle like gas explosions and hiking accidents. The words escaped before Sarah's better judgment could contain them. A flicker of something's surprise warning crossed Rayburn's features. I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Colton. Just making conversation, Sheriff. Sarah turned back to her vandalized truck. I appreciate you taking the report. Rayburn studied her for a moment longer. Welcome back to Pine Ridge. Stop by the station sometime. I'd be interested in hearing about your military experience. He paused. We're always looking for qualified deputies. The suggestion was so unexpected that Sarah nearly laughed. I'll keep that in mind. After Rayburn departed, Sarah assessed the damage more thoroughly. The vandalism was comprehensive but superficial, designed to intimidate rather than disable. The truck was still drivable, though the shattered window would need immediate attention. She located an auto shop on the outskirts of town. Carter's Repairs, the sign proclaimed in faded lettering. As she pulled into the lot, a woman emerged from the garage bay, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. She was approximately Sarah's age, with short-cropped hair and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked with heavy equipment daily. "That's a hell of a welcome wagon," the woman observed, nodding toward the shattered window. "Pine Ridge hospitality isn't what it used to be," Sarah replied. "Neither is Pine Ridge," the woman extended a hand. "Ellie Carter, this is my shop." Sarah Colton, recognition flashed across Ellie's face. "Michael's daughter heard you were back." Her gaze returned to the truck. "This is his old Ford, isn't it? I remember him bringing it in for oil changes." "You worked here that long ago." "It was my father's shop, then I took over after he retired. Navy gave me plenty of mechanical experience." Ellie circled the truck, assessing the damage. "Let me guess. The Scorpions didn't appreciate whatever you did to get on their radar." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're well informed." "Small town. Plus I see the aftermath of their messages more often than I'd like." Ellie peered through the shattered window. "They really did a number on the interior. I can fix the window today, but the upholstery will take longer." "Just the window for now," Sarah decided. "I can live with the rest." While Ellie worked, Sarah wandered the shop, noting the military memorabilia mixed with automotive paraphernalia on the walls. Navy insignia, deployment photos, certificates of commendation. "Afghanistan?" she asked, studying a particular photograph. "2 tours," Ellie confirmed, not looking up from her work. "Naval support for Marine units in Helmand Province. You?" 3 in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. "Army Special Forces support." Ellie glanced up, reassessing Sarah with newfound respect. Support act, in military parlance, often indicated specialized roles adjacent to combat operations. Intelligence logistics, specialized equipment, maintenance for women prior to the lifting of combat restrictions. It had been the closest path to frontline service. "Interesting career choice for the sheriff's daughter," Ellie commented. "Says the Navy mechanic running an auto shop." A grin flickered across Ellie's face. "Touché, some skills translate better to civilian life than other, I guess." They fell into companionable silence as Ellie continued working. There was an easiness between them, the unspoken understanding of those who had served regardless of branch. "So what's your play?" Ellie asked, finally fitting the new window into place. "You kicked a hornet's nest. They've stung back." "What next?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I'm still figuring that out." "Word of advice, don't underestimate how deeply they've dug in here." Ellie secured the window with practice movements. "This isn't a deployment where you can call in air support when things get ugly. It's just you." "Wouldn't be the first time." Ellie paused, studying Sarah with newfound intensity. "You're not just passing through to sell your dad's place, are you? Would it matter if I wasn't?" "It might." Ellie wiped her hands on a clean rag. "There aren't many folks left in Pine Ridge who remember what it was like under your father's watch, fewer still who'd risk standing up for those principles." She handed Sarah the keys. "Windows done on the house." "I can pay," Sarah protested. "Consider it an investment." Ellie's expression hardened. "My father didn't retire willingly. The Scorpions made it clear his health would suffer if he didn't sell to their investment group. I kept the place by agreeing to service first their vehicles at a discount." Her voice dropped, "including after certain modifications that wouldn't pass inspection." The implication was clear. Ellie was forced to facilitate the Scorpions' illegal activities, but wasn't a willing participant. "Thanks for the window," Sarah said, "and the insight." "Just be careful," Ellie warned. "They've got eyes everywhere." Sarah drove directly to Mabel's for her meeting with Bobby Henderson, arriving early to secure a booth with a clear view of both entrances. The diner was busy with the lunch crowd providing suitable background noise for private conversation. Bobby arrived precisely at noon. Now a solid man in his late 30s with the beginnings of a paunch, straining his uniform shirt, his face lit up with genuine warmth when he spotted Sarah. "Look at you," he said, sliding into the booth. "All grown up and intimidating as hell." Despite her wariness, Sarah found herself smiling at his familiar manner. Bobby had been like a younger brother during his time living with them, trailing after her and her father with puppyish admiration. "You didn't do so bad yourself, deputy," she replied. "Dad would be proud." A shadow crossed Bobby's face. "I try to live up to his example." Not easy in the current climate. They ordered coffee for Sarah, a cheeseburger platter for Bobby, before the conversation turned serious. So what really brings you back after all this time? Bobby asked, keeping his voice low. Last I heard you were career military. Things change. Sarah watched his reaction carefully. Medical discharge after a mission went sideways. Figured it was time to settle my father's affairs. 15 years is a long time to leave things unsettled. There was no accusation in his tone, just observation, but Sarah felt defensive nonetheless. Military service has a way of consuming your life. One deployment leads to another, and suddenly a decade and a half has passed. Bobby nodded, accepting this. Well, whatever the reason, it's good to see you. This town could use more Coltons. Speaking of which, Sarah leaned forward slightly. What's the story with Rayburn? Gloria and Mabel have been less than complimentary. Bobby glanced around before answering. Rayburn's complicated, came in after Martinez died, has connections at the state level that keep the budget flowing, but his methods aren't your father's. Meaning he focuses on metrics that look good to county commissioners, low official crime rates, high visibility patrols in affluent areas. Bobby lowered his voice further. Meanwhile, the Scorpions operate with minimal interference, as long as they keep their activities discreet. That sounds like more than complicated, Bobby. That sounds corrupt. I didn't say that. Bobby's expression turned guarded. Look, there's a balance in a town this size. Push too hard against the wrong elements, and funding disappears. Jobs leave infrastructure, projects get delayed. My father didn't seem to have that problem. Your father died, Sarah. Bobby's bluntness was startling. And I was the one who found him. Single shot to the head, execution style, despite the official robbery gone wrong story. So forgive me if I've learned to navigate the system rather than fight it head on. Sarah studied her old friend, noting the strain around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he lifted his coffee cup. Bobby was scared not just of the Scorpions, but of something deeper. What happened to this town, Bobby? What changed? Before he could answer, the diner door opened, admitting Sheriff Rayburn and another deputy. Bobby straightened immediately, his expression closing off. Sheriff, he acknowledged as Rayburn approached their booth. Just catching up with an old friend. So I see. Rayburn's gaze moved between them. Mama's Colton twice in one day. Must be popular. Small town, Sarah replied evenly. Hard to avoid running into people. Indeed. Rayburn turned to Bobby. We've got a situation at the lumber mill. Need you back at the station. Bobby nodded, sliding out of the booth. Sorry to cut this short, Sarah Raincheck. Sure, she watched as Bobby followed Rayburn out, noting the subtle shift in his posture, from relaxed old friend to subordinate officer. After finishing her coffee, Sarah paid and left her mind working through the implications of Bobby's behavior. He was walking a fine line, clearly uncomfortable with Rayburn's leadership, but unwilling or unable to openly oppose it. The question was whether he could be trusted as an ally, or if self-preservation would ultimately dictate his loyalties. Back at her father's house, Sarah reviewed her options. The USB drive provided evidence of corruption reaching back at least 15 years, but much of it would be deemed circumstantial in court. Her father had been building a case for state prosecution, but without his testimony, the documentary evidence alone might not be sufficient. She needed more current evidence linking Rayburn and the Scorpions to illegal activities, and to get that, she needed to be more proactive. Sarah spent the afternoon preparing. From her duffel bag, she retrieved items that hadn't been packed for sentimental reasons. A combat knife, a small set of lockpicks, a tactical flashlight designed for military use, and a compact pair of high-definition binoculars. Standard equipment for certain operations, easily explained away as military souvenirs if discovered. As dusk fell, Sarah changed into dark clothing and mapped her route. The lumber mill Gloria had mentioned seemed the logical starting point. Both her father and Martinez had focused on it before their deaths, and she'd noticed fresh tire tracks during her reconnaissance. If drug manufacturing was occurring in Pine Ridge, the abandoned facility offered privacy, existing infrastructure, and multiple access points. She parked the F-150 in a stand of trees half a mile from the mill, approaching on foot through terrain that reminded her of training exercises at Fort Bragg. The perimeter fence showed signs of regular breaching, a section repeatedly cut and crudely repaired, hidden from casual observation by overgrown vegetation. Sarah slipped through, moving silently across the compound toward the main processing building. Security was minimal. A few motion-activated lights easily avoided and no visible cameras. Either the operation was small enough to fly beneath sophisticated security requirements, or they were relying on Rayburn's protection to deter official interest. The main entrance was securely padlocked, but a side door yielded to her lockpicks. After brief manipulation, Sarah entered, flashlight held ready but unlit, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. The air inside carried a chemical tang that confirmed her suspicions before she'd even explored further the distinctive odor of methamphetamine production. Moving deeper into the facility, Sarah found what she was seeking. The former administrative section had been converted into a processing lab with equipment for manufacturing both methamphetamine and fentanyl, a dangerous combination that explained the increasing overdose rates in the Tri-County region. The operation was professional, clean, and clearly profitable. Sarah documented it with her phone's camera, focusing on distinctive equipment that could be traced to suppliers' handwritten production logs that included dates and quantities, and a ledger book carelessly left open showing distribution routes and finances. Most damning of all was a desk calendar marked with scheduled deliveries and the initials of recipients including WR and JP next to substantial payment amounts. William Rayburn and presumably another local official, Sarah was photographing this final piece of evidence when footsteps sounded outside the building. She killed her flashlight and moved quickly to a hiding spot behind industrial shelving, controlling her breathing as the side door opened. Two men entered, one she recognized as Marco from the tavern confrontation, the other unfamiliar but carrying himself with the authority of someone higher in the organization. "Quantity's good, but we're behind schedule," the unfamiliar man was saying. "The border shipment arrives tomorrow night and we need space in the warehouse." "We'll have it cleared," Marco assured him. "Double shift tonight, product out by morning." "It better be. The boss doesn't accept excuses." The man glanced around the space, his gaze passing over Sarah's hiding spot. "And have someone check the perimeter. Fence was disturbed on my way in." Sarah remained motionless as the men conducted a brief inspection of the facility before departing. When their vehicle's engine had faded, did she emerge mind racing with the implications of what she'd overheard? A border shipment arriving tomorrow night meant an opportunity to catch multiple players in the act, potentially including Rayburn himself. She exited the lumber mill the same way she'd entered, careful to leave minimal trace of her presence. The walk back to her truck was tense but uneventful, and she was soon driving back toward town, mentally organizing the evidence she'd gathered. The logical next step would be contacting state or federal authorities, but without knowing the extent of Rayburn's connections, and with Bobby's loyalty uncertain, Sarah hesitated to bring in officials who might inadvertently tip off the very people she was investigating. She needed a secure way to document and store what she'd found, someone she could trust with the information in case her activities were discovered. Gloria Wilson was a possibility, but involving an elderly civilian in what was rapidly becoming a dangerous situation seemed irresponsible. Ellie Carter, on the other hand, had military training and had already demonstrated a willingness to discreetly oppose the Scorpions. The auto shop likely had storage areas where evidence could be secured, and Ellie's position servicing the gang's vehicles gave her plausible deniability for any interaction with Sarah. Decision made, Sarah drove toward Carter's repairs, planning to approach Ellie the following morning when the shop opened. She was minutes from her destination when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A sheriff's department SUV signaling her to pull over. Sarah complied, positioning the F-150 on the shoulder and keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel as a figure approached. Not Rayburn or Bobby, but one of the deputies she'd observed during shift change. License and registration. He requested flashlight beam, illuminating the truck's interior. Sarah provided the documents, her expression neutral. Problem officer. Taillights out. The deputy studied her license. Sarah Colton. Any relation to the former sheriff? His daughter. The deputy's demeanor shifted slightly. "I see. Still need to address that taillight, ma'am. Safety hazard. I'll get it fixed first thing tomorrow." He nodded, returning her license. "See that you do? We take traffic safety seriously in Pine Ridge." The warning was transparent. They were monitoring her movements. Whether the deputy was directly involved in the corruption or simply following orders remained unclear, but the message was received. Sarah was on their radar. She continued to her father's house rather than Ellie's shop, unwilling to potentially expose a potential ally to surveillance. The break-in had been professional. No signs of forced entry, but subtle indicators that someone had searched the premises during her absence. Drawers slightly ajar, books on shelves minutely misaligned, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the study. They hadn't found the laptop or USB drive, both hidden in a waterproof container buried beneath the shed in the backyard. But the invasion confirmed what Sarah already knew. She was in a race against time with opponents who had home field advantage and official resources at their disposal. As she secured the house for the night, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Need to talk, not safe on phone, cemetery, your mother's grave. 7 a.m., come alone, B, Bobby. The timing was suspicious given the day's events, but Sarah couldn't ignore the possibility that he had vital information. The cemetery was public enough to discourage ambush, yet private enough for conversation. And anyone who knew her history would understand why Sarah Colton might visit her mother's grave after returning to Pine Ridge. She slept fitfully, one ear attuned to any sounds of intrusion, her combat knife within easy reach. Before dawn, she was up and preparing not just for the meeting with Bobby, but for whatever might follow. Military habits reasserted themselves as she checked and rechecked equipment, mentally mapped escape routes, and established contingency plans. The cemetery was shrouded in early morning mist as Sarah arrived parking the F-150 in plain view near the entrance. She approached her mother's grave on foot, senses heightened for any sign of ambush. The headstone appeared exactly as she remembered it. Claire Colton, beloved wife and mother, gone too soon. Sarah kneeled before it, maintaining situational awareness, while appearing to be engaged in private remembrance. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Bobby was late. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew her attention. Not the sheriff's department SUV she'd expected, but a nondescript sedan that parked next to her truck. Bobby emerged alone and in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. He approached with visible caution, his gaze sweeping the cemetery for observers. "Sorry I'm late," he said quietly upon reaching her. "Had to make sure I wasn't followed." "What's this about, Bobby?" Sarah remained kneeling, maintaining the appearance of a daughter paying respects. "I didn't want to say anything at the diner." "Too risky." Bobby glanced around once more before continuing. "Your father's case file, the real one, not the sanitized version in the system. I know where it is." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Go on." "Martinez kept a copy before he died. Gave it to me for safekeeping, told me to sit on it until the time was right." Bobby's voice trembled slightly. "After he was killed, I was too scared to do anything with it. But when you came back," he shook his head, "it's like history repeating itself. They're watching you, Sarah, just like they watched your father before." "Before they killed him," Sarah finished flatly. Bobby nodded, his face pale in the early light. "The robbery story was bullshit. He was executed because he had evidence linking Rayburn to drug trafficking when Rayburn was still a deputy. Martinez continued the investigation quietly after taking over as sheriff, but then Rayburn transferred back, and Martinez had his accident. Why are you telling me this now? Why not 15 years ago? I was 23, Sarah scared shitless. By the time I got the courage to say something, years had passed, evidence was gone, and Rayburn was entrenched with state-level connections. Bobby met her gaze directly. "But you being back changes things. You're Michael Colton's daughter. People remember him, respect what he stood for, and you've got military training connections outside Pine Ridge. Where's the file?" "Hidden at Martinez's old cabin. The place was rebuilt after the explosion, but I buried the file beforehand in a waterproof case near the property line. Coordinates are here." He pressed a folded paper into her hand. "Get it and get out of Pine Ridge. Take it to the federal authorities in Tucson, not the state police. Rayburn has too many friends at the state level." Sarah pocketed the paper. "You should come with me." Bobby shook his head. "Can't, my mother's in the care home here. If I disappear, they'll make her suffer." His expression hardened. "But I can cover for you for a few days. Make excuses if Rayburn asks about your whereabouts." "Why should I trust you, Bobby? You're Rayburn's deputy." "Because I loved your father like my own." Bobby's voice cracked slightly. "He took me in when my parents' divorce left me with nowhere to go. Everything good in my life came from his example." He paused. "And because I was there that night at Donovan's, I saw a patrol car matching Rayburn's pull away from the scene before I found your father's body. I was too young, too scared to put it together then, but I know the truth now." Sarah studied him, weighing his words against her instincts. Bobby had been devoted to her father, had practically worshipped him during his youth. But fear and self-preservation were powerful motivators, and 15 years was a long time for loyalties to shift. "I'll check it out," she said finally. "But I'm not leaving Pine Ridge. Not until this is finished." Sarah, that's suicide. These people killed your father, and he was the sheriff with official authority. What do you think they'll do to you? I've survived worse odds. Bobby looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead checked his watch. I need to go. If I'm late for a shift, Rayburn will suspect something. He hesitated, then added, whatever you decide, be careful. These people play for keeps. After Bobby departed, Sarah remained at her mother's grave for another 15 minutes, processing what she'd learned while maintaining the appearance of a mourning daughter. The coordinates Bobby had provided led to a location about 20 miles outside town. Remote enough for privacy, close enough for a day trip. She returned to her truck and drove back toward her father's house, mind racing with possibilities. If Bobby was telling the truth, the file could provide the evidence needed to bring in federal authorities without risking interference from Rayburn's state-level connections. If he was lying, it could be a trap. Sarah was so focused on tactical calculations that she almost missed the smoke rising above the tree line ahead, thick black smoke in the vicinity of her father's property. She accelerated, heart pounding, rounding the final curve to find her worst fears confirmed. The house was engulfed in flames, fire trucks already on scene, but clearly fighting a losing battle. The blaze had been burning for some time, judging by the collapsed roof and the intensity of the heat that Sarah could feel even from the roadblock established by sheriff's deputies. She parked and approached on foot, identifying herself to the deputy maintaining the perimeter. That's my house. What happened? Ms. Colton, Sheriff Rayburn is over there. The deputy gestured toward a figure standing apart from the firefighting activity, observing with clinical detachment. Sarah approached Rayburn Rage Building with each step, but held in check by military discipline. What happened? She demanded again. Rayburn turned, his expression professionally sympathetic, though his eyes remained cold. Gas leak, apparently. Thankfully, no one was home when it ignited. Gas leak, Sarah repeated flatly. In a house with electric appliances that's been vacant for weeks until I arrived. Faulty infrastructure affects even vacant properties, Miss Colton. Rayburn's tone hardened slightly. We'll conduct a full investigation, of course. Like you did with Martinez's cabin. A flicker of something surprise warning crossed Rayburn's features, just as it had during their conversation about the vandalized truck. I'm not sure what you're implying. I think you are. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. This wasn't a gas leak. This was a message, just like my truck. Careful, Ms. Colton. Grief can lead to irrational accusations. Rayburn glanced toward the burning house. You've suffered a loss here. Perhaps you should focus on practical matters rather than unfounded conspiracy theories. My father taught me to focus on evidence, Sheriff, and the evidence suggests someone doesn't want me in Pine Ridge. Or perhaps old houses with neglected maintenance have accidents. Rayburn's radio crackled and he checked before returning his attention to Sarah. I need to coordinate with fire services. My condolences on your loss. Ms. Colton, the department will be in touch regarding the investigation. As Rayburn walked away, Sarah surveyed what remained of her childhood home. Her father's legacy reduced to smoldering timber and ash. The message was unmistakable escalation. First the truck, now the house. The next target would be Sarah herself if she didn't back down. But Michael, Colton's daughter, had never been one to retreat from a fight. If anything, the destruction of her father's home had eliminated her last hesitation. She no longer had to worry about preserving his memories or protecting his sanctuary. All that remained was justice for her father, for Martinez, and for Pine Ridge itself. Sarah returned to the F-150, grateful that her military instincts had prompted her to keep essential items, including the laptop and USB drive, secured separately from the house. She now had no home base, but also no anchor, holding her in a predictable location. The next phase would require mobility, unconventional tactics, and allies whom Rayburn and the Scorpions wouldn't anticipate. Sarah started the truck's engine, her decision made. It was time to visit Martinez's cabin and retrieve the file Bobby had mentioned. After that, she would contact Ellie Carter, and then, using the combined evidence from both her father and Martinez, Sarah would begin dismantling the operation that had cost so many lives, starting with the shipment scheduled to arrive that night. Pine Ridge had taken enough from the Colton family. Now it was Sarah's turn to take something back, justice delivered with military precision against those who believed themselves untouchable. As she drove away from the burning ruins of her past, Sarah's expression hardened into the focused intensity that had carried her through the worst combat zones in the world. She hadn't come home looking for a war, but war had found her nonetheless, and Sarah Colton had been training for this her entire life. The gravel crunched beneath Sarah's boots as she approached the rebuilt cabin that had once belonged to Martinez. Located on 5 secluded acres bordering national forest land, it was exactly the kind of retreat a small-town sheriff would choose: peaceful, private, with strategic sightlines in all directions. According to Bobby's coordinates, the hidden case should be buried near the property line where a lightning-struck pine created a natural landmark. Sarah found it easily enough, its blackened trunk still standing as a sentinel to Martinez's final secret. After ensuring she was alone, Sarah retrieved a collapsible shovel from her truck and began digging at the precise location Bobby had indicated. 3 feet down, her shovel struck something solid, a waterproof tactical case, military grade, the kind used to transport sensitive documents through hostile environments. Sarah excavated it quickly, brushing off soil before examining the combination lock. Bobby hadn't provided the code, but she had a strong suspicion. She tried her father's badge number, 1457, and was rewarded with a soft click as the lock disengaged. Inside, protected by waterproof seals, lay a thick file folder and a portable hard drive. Martinez had been thorough, documenting the investigation her father had begun 15 years earlier. Sarah replaced everything in the case, reburied the disturbed earth to hide her activity, and returned to her truck, mind racing with possibilities. With her father's house reduced to ash, Sarah needed a secure location to review the evidence. A motel would be too obvious, potentially monitored by Rayburn's deputies. Gloria Wilson's home would put the elderly woman at risk. That left one viable option: Ellie Carter. The auto shop was closed when Sarah arrived, but lights glowed from the residence attached to the rear of the building. Sarah parked behind the structure, out of sight from the road, and approached cautiously. Ellie answered her knock with a shotgun held casually at low, ready, not aimed but available if needed. Recognition softened her wary expression. "Heard about your house," she said, lowering the weapon. "Didn't expect you'd still be in town." "Resilience runs in the family," Sarah replied. "Need a place to regroup. Thought you might be willing." Ellie studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, but understand what you're asking. My shop, my home, they're all I have." "I understand the risk," Sarah acknowledged, entering the modest living space behind the repair bay. "Wouldn't ask if I had alternatives." Ellie secured the door behind them. "What's your plan? Because if it's just hiding out until things cool down, you should know things never cool down in Pine Ridge." "Not anymore." Sarah set the tactical case on Ellie's kitchen table. "Not hiding, gathering intelligence before engaging military basics." "And then what? You're one person against an entrenched organization with official protection." "Wouldn't be the first time I've faced unfavorable odds." Sarah opened the case, revealing its contents. "Martinez compiled this before he died. Combined with what my father documented, it's enough to bring in federal authorities if I can get it to them safely." Ellie's expression shifted as she processed the implications. "So you need a secure location, communications, and potentially an exit strategy." "For starters, but there's more. The Scorpions are receiving a shipment tonight, likely drugs or weapons. If I can document that transaction with Rayburn present." "That's his surveillance, not direct engagement," Ellie pointed out. "Smart but risky. Rayburn never shows up personally for deliveries. He sends deputies who report directly to him, keeps himself insulated." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You seem well informed." "Told you they forced me to service their vehicles, including after certain modifications." Ellie's voice hardened. "I hear things while I'm working. They don't consider a mechanic a threat." "Their mistake," Sarah observed. "Those modifications, anything useful tactically?" A slow smile spread across Ellie's face. "Might be reinforced suspension, hidden compartments, upgraded communications, and some specialized electrical work that isn't exactly street legal." She studied Sarah with new interest. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Taking them on?" "They killed my father, destroyed his home, used his death to corrupt everything he stood for." Sarah's voice remained steady, despite the emotion behind her words. "I'm not just doing this. I'm finishing what he started." Ellie nodded slowly. "Navy taught me to recognize a lost cause and a worthy one. This," she gestured toward the evidence, "this might actually be possible." She moved to a cabinet and retrieved a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "But first we plan properly. No heroics, no revenge, fueled mistakes." For the next hour, they reviewed Martinez's files and the data from Sarah's father's USB drive, cross-referencing names, locations, and operational details. The picture that emerged was more complex than Sarah had initially suspected. The Scorpions weren't simply a local gang that had corrupted the sheriff. They were the local arm of a multi-state operation with connections to both Mexican cartels and legitimate businesses that laundered proceeds. Rayburn's just middle management, Ellie concluded, studying an organizational chart Martinez had assembled. Powerful locally, but he answers to someone higher. Sarah tapped a name that appeared in both Martinez's notes and her father's files. James Phillips, the mayor, makes sense, Ellie murmured. Phillips was a Nobody County commissioner when your father was alive. Suddenly becomes mayor after Rayburn takes over, starts pushing development projects that never materialize but move a lot of money through local banks. Perfect cover for laundering drug profits, Sarah agreed, and explains why civic institutions haven't pushed back against the Scorpions. The corruption reaches the top. Their analysis was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a text message from Bobby. Lumber mill raid scheduled for tomorrow. Evidence plan happening tonight to justify it. Are suspicious about your timing. Watch yourself. Sarah showed the message to Ellie. They're setting up a cover story, raid the mill after removing any actual evidence of their operation, leave behind enough to justify a police action, but nothing that would trigger federal involvement. And if you happen to be caught there tonight investigating, I'd be the perfect scapegoat, Sarah finished. Army veteran with history of trauma, daughter seeking vigilante justice for her father's death, killed while attempting to plant false evidence. Ellie's expression darkened. A clean narrative to close any questions about your father and Martinez while eliminating a new threat. Classic counterintelligence strategy. Discredit the source, control the narrative. Sarah checked her watch. We need to move faster than anticipated. The shipment is our opportunity. If I can document the actual exchange before they sanitize the mill, not just document, Ellie decided, rising from the table, we need to disrupt. Follow me. She led Sarah through a concealed door connecting the living quarters to a basement beneath the repair bay. Unlike the living space above, which was modestly furnished but otherwise unremarkable, the basement revealed Ellie's true nature, a tactical workshop where military precision met mechanical ingenuity. Workbenches held disassembled electronics, modified tools, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment in various stages of construction. A locked cabinet stood against one wall, which Ellie opened to reveal a collection of weapons, not the hunting rifles common in rural areas, but tactical equipment that indicated specialized training. Navy mechanic doesn't quite cover it, does it? Sarah observed. Naval intelligence with a mechanical specialization, Ellie clarified. Developed certain skills that proved useful in field operations. Been applying them here on a smaller scale, gathering evidence against the Scorpions in case an opportunity presented itself. She selected items from various storage areas. If we're doing this, we do it right. Documented evidence for authorities plus enough disruption to prevent them from recovering before that evidence reaches the right hands. Sarah assessed the equipment with a professional eye. You've been planning this for a while. Since they forced my father out, just needed the right catalyst. Ellie glanced at Sarah. The sheriff's daughter returning with military training and a personal vendetta. That's one hell of a catalyst. For the next several hours, they prepared. Ellie provided detailed intelligence on the Scorpions' operations based on her observations, while servicing their vehicles, including the mill's layout, security protocols, and personnel rotations. Sarah contributed tactical expertise from her Special Forces support experience, developing a plan that maximized their limited resources while minimizing risk. By late afternoon, they had assembled what they needed: surveillance equipment to document the shipment, delivery, non-lethal countermeasures to create disruption, and exfiltration routes that would allow them to deliver evidence to federal authorities without local interception. One more thing, Ellie said as they conducted final equipment checks. You should know that after tonight, there's no going back. If we succeed, you're a whistleblower who helped bring down corrupt officials. If we fail, we're dead, Sarah stated matter-of-factly, or imprisoned on fabricated charges. I've accepted those odds. I figured as much. Just wanted it said aloud. Ellie handed Sarah a secure satellite phone. This connects directly to a contact at the DEA, someone I've been feeding information to for months, limited communication. But if things go sideways, he can verify our legitimacy to federal responders. Sarah accepted the phone, recognizing its value. You really have been planning this, waiting for the right moment, and partner. Ellie's expression turned serious. Your father was a good man, Sarah. One of the few who treated me with respect when I returned from deployment. This town owes his memory better than what it's become. As dusk approached, they moved out in Ellie's unmarked service van, taking a circuitous route to avoid regular patrol patterns. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, mentally reviewing their approach while scanning for surveillance. "You're sure about the delivery time?" she asked as they parked in a wooded area half a mile from the lumber mill. "Positive every third Thursday between 9 and 10 p.m. I've tracked the pattern for months based on when they bring vehicles in for post-delivery maintenance." Ellie distributed equipment from the rear of the van. "They're creatures of habit, which works in our favor." They approached on foot using the forest as cover until they reached the perimeter fence. Sarah noted fresh tire tracks confirming recent activity, likely the evidence plant Bobby had warned about. "Two-man security team at the main entrance," Ellie whispered, observing through night vision binoculars. "Standard procedure." Sarah nodded, adjusting her tactical vest. "Let's establish surveillance positions before the shipment arrives. I'll take the north quadrant, you cover the south." They separated, moving silently through the shadows to their designated observation points. Sarah positioned herself on the roof of an outbuilding with clear sight lines to the main delivery area, setting up a compact video system designed to operate in low-light conditions without detection. For 45 tense minutes, they waited, communicating via silent signals when necessary. Then at precisely 9:17 p.m., headlights appeared on the access road, two vehicles approaching in tandem. The first was a black SUV that Sarah recognized from her previous recon as belonging to the Scorpion's leadership. The second was a nondescript box truck with out-of-state plates. The vehicles passed the security checkpoint without stopping, confirming the guards were part of the operation rather than legitimate security. They parked near the main building's loading dock, engines idling briefly before shutting down. From her vantage point, Sarah documented everything: the arrival, the four men who emerged from the SUV, including Marco, and the leader she'd observed meeting with Rayburn, in the subsequent unloading of crates from the box truck. The operation proceeded with military efficiency, suggesting training beyond typical criminal organizations. Within 20 minutes, all crates had been transferred inside the building. Sarah was about to signal Ellie to proceed to Phase 2 when another vehicle appeared, a sheriff's department SUV, lights off. Approaching from the secondary access road, Sarah adjusted her camera, focusing on this new arrival. The driver's face became clear as he stepped out. Bobby Henderson, not Rayburn as she'd hoped. He approached the Scorpion leader with familiar ease, accepting an envelope that likely contained cash before conducting a brief inspection of the delivered goods. The sight confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Bobby's warning about the raid had been part of a setup to lure her into a trap. He wasn't an ally trying to protect her. He was a mole attempting to manipulate her. Sarah signaled to Ellie, modifying their plan to account for this betrayal. They would still document the exchange and create disruption, but now needed to be particularly cautious about their extraction, as Bobby knew their potential routes and capabilities. Inside the mill, the activity increased as workers began processing the delivered materials. Through her video feed, Sarah captured clear evidence of drug manufacturing, the unpacking of chemical precursors, the preparation of production equipment, and the coordination between local Scorpions and the delivery team. When all key players were documented and the operation fully underway, Sarah initiated Phase 2. She activated a series of remote devices Ellie had positioned earlier in the day, not explosives which might destroy evidence, but flashbang diversions that would create confusion while triggering the mill's outdated fire suppression system. The first device detonated with a brilliant flash and deafening concussion, followed seconds later by two more at strategic points around the facility. Shouts of alarm echoed across the compound as the ancient sprinkler system activated, drenching the production area and sending workers scrambling to protect the most valuable materials. In the ensuing chaos, Sarah and Ellie executed a coordinated movement to their secondary positions, continuing to document the panic while remaining undetected. The Scorpion leader emerged from the building, shouting orders and demanding an immediate security sweep, while Bobby drew his service weapon and began directing the response. "We've got what we need," Ellie's voice came through Sarah's earpiece. "Extraction route, Alpha compromise switch to Charlie." "Copy that?" Sarah acknowledged, gathering her equipment. "Meet at rendezvous point in 12 minutes. She was about to descend from her position when movement caught her eye. Another vehicle approaching, this one moving with urgent purpose. The unmarked sedan parked haphazardly, and Sheriff Rayburn emerged, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the disrupted operation. Sarah quickly refocused her camera, capturing this unexpected bonus, direct evidence of Rayburn's involvement. He conferred briefly with Bobby and the Scorpion leader, their body language indicating fury rather than surprised concern. This wasn't a sheriff responding to a potential criminal incident. This was a manager dealing with a disruption to his business operation. With this final piece of evidence secured, Sarah initiated her withdrawal using the continued confusion as cover. The extraction route, designated as Charlie, took her through the northwest section of the compound, an area less used and therefore less likely to be immediately searched. She was halfway to the perimeter fence when a shout rang out. "They're on your three," followed by the distinctive crack of a pistol shot. Sarah dropped immediately using a decrepit forklift for cover as she assessed the threat, two Scorpions advancing with handguns drawn, having spotted her movement against the backdrop of emergency lights. Military training took over as Sarah calculated options. Returning fire would escalate the situation beyond their planned non-lethal approach, potentially undermining the legitimacy of their evidence. Surrender wasn't viable, given Bobby's betrayal. That left evasion and distraction. From her tactical vest, Sarah retrieved a small cylinder that Ellie had provided a modified smoke grenade developed for urban warfare training. She activated it and rolled it toward her pursuers, creating a dense cloud that obscured vision without causing permanent harm. Using the cover, Sarah changed directions, moving laterally before continuing toward the extraction point. Behind her, additional shouts indicated the search was intensifying, with Rayburn's voice cutting through the din. "Find them now." The perimeter fence appeared ahead with a pre-cut section prepared during their earlier approach. Sarah slipped through, moving quickly but carefully through the forest toward the rendezvous point where Ellie should be waiting with the van. She arrived at the designated location, scanning for threats before revealing her position. No van waited, no sign of Ellie. Sarah checked her watch. Still within the agreed time frame, she would wait 3 minutes before initiating contingency protocols. 2 minutes later, the distinctive rumble of the van's modified engine reached her ears seconds before the vehicle itself appeared, moving with reduced lighting to minimize detection. "Sorry for the delay," Ellie said as Sarah climbed aboard. "Had to avoid a patrol on the main road." Rayburn showed up. Sarah reported securing her equipment. "Got him on video conferring with the Scorpion leadership. Bobby too, he's definitely compromised. Confirms our suspicions about his warning." Ellie agreed, accelerating away from the area. "But complicates our next steps. He knows about Martinez's file. And about my interest in it," Sarah added grimly, "which means they'll be watching the cabin and surrounding areas. We need to move fast." Ellie decided, taking a series of turns designed to identify and lose potential details. "Our original timeline is compressed. The evidence we've gathered needs to reach federal authorities before Rayburn can establish his cover story about the raid." Sarah nodded, reviewing the video footage on a secure tablet. "We've got clear documentation of illegal materials. Rayburn and Bobby's involvement in the Scorpion leadership. Question is, how do we get it into the right hands when local law enforcement is compromised?" "My DEA contact," Ellie replied. "But he's in Phoenix, not locally available. We'd need to get this to him directly or upload securely through channels they can't monitor." "Which means leaving Pine Ridge," Sarah concluded. "But they'll be watching the roads, especially after tonight." "Not all roads." A hint of satisfaction crept into Ellie's voice. "I've maintained certain alternative routes from my property that don't appear on official maps. Old logging roads that connect to state forest land, eventually leading to Highway 17 without passing any checkpoint Rayburn might establish. How soon can we move?" "I need 2 hours to prepare the vehicle and secure the shop. We leave before dawn." Ellie glanced at Sarah. "Once we make this move, there's no coming back. Not as things are." "I know." Sarah continued reviewing the evidence, her expression hardening as she watched Bobby's betrayal played back in high definition. "But Pine Ridge stopped being home a long time ago. What matters now is justice for my father, for Martinez, and for everyone else these people have hurt." They returned to Ellie's shop via a circuitous route, ensuring they weren't followed. While Ellie prepared a specialized vehicle for their journey, a nondescript SUV with modified engine and communications countermeasures, Sarah consolidated their evidence, creating multiple secure backups. The combined files told a compelling story: 15 years of corruption that had transformed Pine Ridge from a struggling but honest small town into a distribution hub for drug trafficking, with local officials either complicit or silenced. Her father had discovered the initial tendrils of this corruption during Rayburn's first stint in Pine Ridge, only to be eliminated before he could bring evidence to state prosecutors. Martinez had continued the investigation, covertly documenting the expansion of operations until his own accidental death. And now Sarah had captured the current state of affairs with direct evidence linking Rayburn Bobby and other officials to active criminal enterprises. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," Ellie announced, entering the room after securing the perimeter. "Police scanner indicates roadblocks are being established on all major exits from Pine Ridge, officially for a public safety exercise, but the timing is obvious." "They know we have evidence," Sarah concluded. "How long until they connect it to you?" "Not long," Ellie admitted. "I've serviced their vehicles for years, but I'm also a veteran with technical skills who lives alone and keeps to herself. Once they eliminate other possibilities, I'll move up their suspect list. Then we accelerate our timeline. We leave now using your alternative routes and contact your DEA connection as soon as we're beyond local jurisdiction." Ellie nodded, retrieving a go bag that suggested this moment had been anticipated long before Sarah's arrival in Pine Ridge. "Vehicles ready. I've loaded essential equipment and enough supplies for several days if needed." As they transferred their evidence and gear to the modified SUV, Sarah paused, sensing a shift in atmosphere that her combat experiences had taught her to recognize the distinctive feeling of being watched. "Wait," she whispered, halting Ellie mid-movement. "We have company." They extinguished lights and moved to defensive positions, using the shop's layout for cover while maintaining sight lines to potential entry points. Minutes passed in tense silence before headlights swept across the property, not approaching directly, but positioned on the access road, illuminating the area while remaining at a distance. "Tactical positioning," Sarah observed quietly. "They're establishing containment before moving in." Ellie checked the surveillance system she'd installed around her property. 4 vehicles minimum. Sheriff's Department and civilian trucks. They're coordinating using standard encirclement protocol. "Now, how much time do we have?" 10 minutes, maybe less. Once they've confirmed positions, they'll advance." Ellie's expression remained calm despite the direness of their situation. "We need the evidence out more than we need ourselves out. The backup server in my workshop can transmit everything to my DEA contact if activated with the right protocols." "You're suggesting we separate," Sarah realized. "One creates a diversion while the other secures the evidence transmission." "I'm suggesting I create a diversion," Ellie clarified. "This is my property. I know every inch, every hiding spot, every potential exit. You take the primary evidence in the SUV. I'll activate the transmission system and then lead them on a chase that creates time for you to clear the area." "That's suicide," Sarah protested. "Or a one-way ticket to detention where accidents happen regularly." "Not necessarily. I've prepared for this possibility since they forced my father out." A grim smile crossed Ellie's face. "Naval intelligence teaches contingency planning. I have extraction options they don't know about. Outside the encirclement, tight and visible now on the surveillance monitors, as figures move through the darkness. Weapons drawn, communication. Chatter indicated Rayburn himself was coordinating the operation with Bobby, leading a second team approaching from the rear of the property. Decision time had arrived. Sarah assessed options with the rapid clarity that had made her effective in combat situations. Staying together increased capture risk for both. Separating created better odds for the evidence to reach authorities, even if one of them was captured. Ellie's knowledge of the property's defensive capabilities gave her better survival chances in a diversion role, and the evidence needed priority protection. 30 minutes, Sarah decided. You buy me 30 minutes to clear local jurisdiction. Then you extract using your planned route. We rendezvous at the backup location you mentioned, the fishing cabin near State Route 17. Ellie nodded, already moving toward her workshop. "Take this," she said, handing Sarah a small device. "Satellite tracker. If either of us doesn't make the rendezvous, the survivor contacts the DEA directly." She paused, meeting Sarah's gaze directly. "Your father would be proud. Whatever happens next." "We're both making that rendezvous," Sarah replied firmly. "Count on it." They separated Sarah to the SUV, hidden in a false section of the repair bay, Ellie to initiate both the evidence transmission and her diversionary tactics. As Sarah prepared to depart through a concealed exit at the property's edge, the first flashbang detonated at the front of the shop, followed by the distinctive pop of smoke grenades. Ellie's diversion had begun, drawing attention and resources away from the rear areas, where Sarah would make her escape. Through the surveillance feed still visible on the vehicle's dashboard, Sarah watched as Ellie executed a masterful tactical withdrawal, leading pursuers deeper into the shop complex, while avoiding direct confrontation. Sarah started the SUV, its engine deliberately quieter than standard models, thanks to Ellie's modifications. The hidden exit disguised as a defunct storage shed, but actually concealing a narrow pass-through to neighboring property, opened silently on well-maintained hydraulics. As she navigated through the darkness using minimal lighting and Ellie's programmed route guidance, Sarah heard the distant sounds of pursuit, shouted commands, vehicle engines, the intermittent static of radio communications. The diversion was working, drawing resources toward Ellie's deliberately visible movement while Sarah slipped away undetected. The logging road Ellie had mentioned proved to be little more than a game trail, in places requiring all of Sarah's driving skill to navigate. But it served its purpose, providing passage away from areas Rayburn would think to monitor. After 20 minutes of tense progress, the trail connected with a more substantial Forest Service road, allowing increased speed toward the state highway beyond. Sarah checked the surveillance link, finding it inactive, either disabled deliberately by Ellie or compromised during the raid. The satellite tracker showed no movement from Ellie's position indicator, suggesting either successful evasion in a stationary location or capture, pushing aside concern for her ally. Sarah focused on the immediate mission-clearing local jurisdiction with the evidence intact. The county line lay approximately 15 miles ahead, beyond which Rayburn's direct authority would be limited. While he might have connections with neighboring agencies, those relationships would require explanation and justification for pursuits crossing jurisdictional boundaries. The Forest Service road emerged onto a secondary highway just as false dawn began lightening the eastern sky. Sarah checked her surroundings for pursuit before accelerating toward the county line, maintaining a speed that wouldn't attract attention from regular patrols while putting distance between herself and Pine Ridge. 10 miles from the jurisdictional boundary, headlights appeared in her rear-view mirror, moving fast, gaining ground with the determined purpose of a pursuit vehicle rather than a regular traveler. Sarah increased speed incrementally, weighing the risks of a high-speed chase against the probability of interception. The pursuing vehicle closed the gap despite her efforts, its light bar activating to reveal a Sheriff's Department SUV. Sarah maintained course, knowing that stopping now would mean surrendering the evidence before it could reach federal authorities. Her radio crackled to life, a secure channel Ellie had installed, not the standard police band. "Sarah, it's me. Change of plans. Pull over." Ellie's voice tense but controlled. Sarah hesitated, suspecting a trick. Ellie being forced to make the call under duress. "Authentication code," she demanded, slowing slightly but not stopping. "Sierra Echo Victor, Echo November." Ellie replied immediately. "It's really me. Pull over. I've got new information." The authentication code matched their pre-established protocol. Sarah eased the SUV onto the shoulder, positioning it for rapid departure if necessary, while maintaining visual contact with the approaching vehicle. The sheriff's SUV parked 20 yards behind her, its light bar still active but no siren. A figure emerged, Ellie moving with the careful precision of someone injured, but functional. No one else exited the vehicle. Sarah kept her weapon ready as Ellie approached, scanning continuously for additional threats. "What happened?" she asked as Ellie reached the driver's window. "Improvised," Ellie replied, grimacing as she leaned against the door. Blood stained her left sleeve, a graze not life-threatening. "They cornered me in the workshop. I used the emergency protocols to trigger a controlled electrical fire, created enough chaos to reach one of their vehicles." "You stole a Sheriff's Department SUV. Seemed appropriate." Ellie managed a tight smile. "But they'll have tracked it by now. We need to transfer to your vehicle and keep moving." I contacted my DEA connection directly during the confusion. "He's sending a team to meet us, but not in Pine Ridge jurisdiction. We need to make the county line." Sarah helped Ellie transfer to the passenger seat, noting the field dressing on her arm. "Professional, efficient military standard." "What about Rayburn?" "Last I saw, he was coordinating fire suppression efforts. My shop won't burn completely. I designed the system to create maximum smoke with minimal structural damage, but it's bought us time." Ellie settled into the seat with a suppressed groan. "The evidence transmission completed before I triggered the fire. It's already in DEA hands electronically, but they'll want the physical documentation and our testimony." Sarah accelerated back onto the highway, pushing the vehicle harder now that immediate pursuit had been delayed. "And Bobby, he was leading the team that cornered me, almost had me too." Something in Ellie's tone suggested there was more to that encounter than she was sharing. "He's fully committed to Rayburn's operation. Sarah, whatever loyalty he once had to your father is gone." The betrayal stung despite Sarah's earlier suspicions. Bobby had been like family, once had lived in their home during his most formative years. That he would align himself with the very people responsible for Michael Colton's death represented a corruption of character that Sarah found difficult to reconcile with the boy she'd known. They crossed the county line 10 minutes later, both exhaling slightly as that symbolic barrier passed beneath their wheels. Rayburn's direct authority ended here, requiring cooperation from neighboring jurisdictions for any continued pursuit. Rendezvous point is 30 miles ahead, Ellie directed, checking the secure satellite phone. My contact confirms the team is en route, ETA 45 minutes. For the first time since discovering her father's USB drive, Sarah allowed herself to consider what success might look like. The evidence they'd compiled was substantial: 15 years of documented corruption, linking local officials to drug trafficking, multiple suspicious deaths, including a sheriff and his deputy, and direct video evidence of current criminal operations involving law enforcement. Sufficient cause for federal intervention, bypassing state-level connections that might otherwise shield Rayburn and his associates. What happens after? Sarah asked, voicing the question that had been secondary to survival until now. To Pine Ridge, I mean. Depends on how deep the corruption goes, Ellie replied, adjusting her field dressing. Federal investigations certainly arrest prosecutions, but towns like Pine Ridge don't recover easily from this kind of systemic failure. It'll take years to rebuild legitimate institutions. My father gave his life trying to prevent exactly this outcome, Sarah said quietly. 15 years later, and we're still fighting the battle he started. Some fights span generations, Ellie observed. Doesn't make them any less worth fighting. They continued in silence for several miles, each processing the implications of what they'd set in motion. Pine Ridge would never be the same after federal authorities descended with evidence of widespread corruption. For better or worse, the town Michael Colton had dedicated his life to protecting would be irrevocably altered. The designated rendezvous point, a roadside diner that catered to long-haul truckers, open 24/7 and accustomed to all manner of travelers, appeared ahead. Sarah parked in a well-lit section of the lot, positioning the vehicle for rapid departure if necessary, while maintaining clear sight lines to all approaches. 40 minutes until contact. Ellie confirmed, checking the satellite phone. We should go inside and act like normal travelers, less suspicious than sitting in the parking lot. Oh, and they entered the diner, selecting a booth with views of both the entrance and their parked vehicle. The early morning crowd was sparse, a few truckers at the counter, a family with sleepy children in a corner booth, two men in business attire reviewing documents over coffee. Coffee black, Sarah ordered when the waitress approached. And first aid supplies if you have them. The waitress glanced at Ellie's blood-stained sleeve. Kitchen has a kit. I'll bring it with your coffee. Appreciate it, Ellie said, maintaining the appearance of weary travelers rather than fugitives. When the waitress returned with coffee and a basic first aid kit, Sarah assisted Ellie in properly cleaning and redressing the wound, a bullet graze that had torn through muscle but missed major vessels and bone. Bobby's aim was off, Ellie commented, wincing as antiseptic solution contacted raw tissue. He had a clear shot but pulled right at the last second. Old loyalties die hard, I guess. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. He shot at you. When I was cornered in the workshop, had me dead too, right? Then hesitated. That's when I triggered the electrical fire. Ellie studied Sarah's expression. He's on their side, Sarah, but maybe not completely. There might still be something of the boy your father raised in there. Before Sarah could respond, the diner door opened, admitting a man whose bearing immediately registered as law enforcement, despite his civilian clothing. He surveyed the room casually before approaching their booth. Carter, he acknowledged Ellie with a slight nod. I see you've escalated matters considerably since our last communication. Circumstances required acceleration, Ellie replied evenly. This is Sarah Colton, Michael's daughter. She's provided the final pieces we've been waiting for. The man, presumably Ellie's DEA contact, turned his attention to Sarah. David Reeves, Drug Enforcement Administration. Your father's case has been on our radar for years, Ms. Colton, but jurisdictional issues and lack of actionable evidence prevented intervention. We have actionable evidence now, Sarah stated, indicating the secure drive containing their documentation. Direct video of Sheriff Rayburn coordinating with drug traffickers' financial records, linking local officials to laundering operations and historical documentation, compiled by both my father and Deputy Martinez before their deaths. Reeves's expression remained professional, but interest sharpened his gaze. If verified, that would provide sufficient cause for a federal task force. We've suspected Pine Ridge was a distribution hub for cross-border operations, but proving local law enforcement involvement has been challenging. It goes beyond Rayburn, Ellie added. Mayor Phillips County commissioners, possibly judges who've dismissed cases against Scorpion members. Martinez documented systematic infiltration of multiple institutions. A task force is already mobilizing. Reeves informed them, your electronic transmission prompted immediate action, but we need you both secure before proceeding. Witnesses with direct knowledge are essential for successful prosecution. You're extracting us, Sarah concluded. To Phoenix initially, then possibly further depending on threat assessment. Reeves checked his watch. My team arrives in 10 minutes. We'll transfer you directly to federal custody and protection while the operation against Pine Ridge proceeds. Sarah exchanged glances with Ellie, both recognizing this moment as the culmination of their efforts and potentially the end of their direct involvement. Once in federal protection, they would become witnesses rather than active participants in bringing justice to Pine Ridge. There's something else you should know, Sarah said, making a decision she'd been considering since her reviewing in Martinez's files. The operation extends beyond Pine Ridge. Martinez documented connections to similar setups in at least 3 neighboring counties. It's a network, not an isolated corruption. Reeves's eyebrows rose slightly. That aligns with our broader investigation into regional distribution patterns. The Pine Ridge connection has been suspected, but unconfirmed until now. If you're mobilizing a task force, Sarah continued, you'll need people who understand the local dynamics, people who can identify key players by sight, who know the geography and operational patterns. Are you volunteering, Ms. Colton? I'm stating the obvious, Sarah replied evenly. Ellie and I have direct knowledge that would benefit your operation. Witness protection serves no purpose if the underlying network remains operational. Reeves studied her with new assessment. Your father was similarly direct in his approach to law enforcement, but federal operations have protocols. Colton civilians, even those with military background, don't participate in active enforcement actions. We're not asking to lead raids, Ellie interjected, but this network has killed to protect itself multiple times. They eliminated Michael Colton and Martinez when they got too close. They'll have contingency plans for federal intervention, alternative routes, secondary facilities, loyal assets, and positions to warn primary targets. Information we can provide, Sarah emphasized real-time as your operation unfolds. Reeves appeared ready to dismiss their proposal when the satellite phone chirped with an incoming message. Ellie checked it, her expression tightening. Problem? Reeves asked. Rayburn's moving faster than anticipated. Ellie reported. Emergency alert just went out to all regional law enforcement officer, down suspect armed and dangerous. Request all units assist in apprehension. They're expanding their search authority, Sarah realized, using false officer casualty to justify multi-jurisdictional pursuit. Standard protocol would have neighboring agencies establish checkpoints, create a perimeter, which means we're still contained even outside Pine Ridge boundaries, Ellie concluded. And your extraction team might encounter unexpected resistance from local agencies who believe they're assisting a legitimate manhunt. Reeves processed this development with professional calm. I'll alert my team to the potential complication. We have federal authority that supersedes local alerts, but it requires proper identification and communication, which takes time we may not have if local units are already mobilizing. We need an alternative extraction, Sarah stated, military training asserting itself as she assessed tactical realities, something that bypasses road networks entirely. The airfield, Ellie suggested, 10 miles north of here, private minimal staffing, sufficient runway for medium aircraft. I've used it for parts deliveries. Reeves considered this, then nodded sharply. I'll redirect the extraction team. We maintain a relationship with several private aviation contractors for exactly these scenarios. He rose from the booth. Finish your coffee, normally then proceed to your vehicle. I'll follow at distance in my own transportation. No convoy formation, no obvious connection between our vehicles. After he departed, Sarah and Ellie exchanged glances that communicated both determination and the acknowledgement of continuing danger. They'd escaped Pine Ridge's immediate jurisdiction, but Rayburn's influence and desperation extended further. The final phase of their journey remained uncertain. They paid their bill and returned to the SUV, proceeding north toward the airfield with deliberate normalcy, not too fast to attract attention, not too slow to suggest hesitation. In the rearview mirror, Reeves's sedan maintained a consistent distance, providing overwatch without obvious connection. "Think they bought it?" Sarah asked as they navigated the rural highway. The officer down alert. "Some Willie?" Ellie replied, scanning their surroundings for potential threats. "Those with connections to Rayburn will understand it's tactical. Others will follow protocol without questioning. Either way, it expands his reach temporarily, until federal authority supersedes, which requires official channels, documentation, jurisdictional notifications." Ellie checked the satellite phone. "Bureaucracy takes time, even in emergencies. Rayburn is counting on that window to intercept us before federal protection is established." Sarah processed this analysis, recognizing its accuracy from her military experience. Even with clear chains of command, official responses followed protocols that created predictable timing patterns. Rayburn, with his law enforcement background, would understand these patterns and exploit them. The rural landscape flowed past as they continued north. Its peaceful appearance belying the tension of their situation. Fields gave way to scrubland, then scattered forest interspersed with small ranches. Traffic remained minimal at this early hour, each approaching vehicle registering as potential threat until proven otherwise. They were approximately 5 miles from the airfield when Sarah noticed a vehicle maintaining consistent distance behind them. Not Reeves's sedan, which remained visible at its established position, but a dark pickup with tinted windows that had appeared from a side road and adjusted speed to match theirs. "Possible tail 6 o'clock, she reported quietly. Pickup heavily tinted, maintaining exact distance. Ellie checked the side mirror, same model used by several Scorpion lieutenants. Could be coincidence, but not taking that chance. Sarah decided increasing speed incrementally to test the following vehicle's response. The pickup matched the acceleration, precisely maintaining the same distance. Classic surveillance technique. "Definitely a tail," Ellie confirmed. "Question is whether it's isolated observation or part of a coordinated intercept." The answer came moments later as another pickup appeared ahead, pulling from a ranch access road and slowing deliberately to constrain their forward progress. A classic boxing maneuver. One vehicle behind one, ahead gradually compressing the target's movement options until forced to stop. "Coordinated," Sarah stated grimly, assessing options with combat-honed clarity. The road offered limited alternatives, no immediate turnoffs, moderate ditches on either side that would disable their vehicle if taken at speed, and open terrain beyond that would make foot escape impractical. "Airfield is still 3 miles ahead," Ellie noted, checking the satellite phone. "Reeves's team is on final approach to the runway. We need to break this containment before they can establish a full roadblock," Sarah decided. Tactical assessment. Rear vehicle as primary threat driver, plus at least one passenger likely armed, based on Scorpion protocols. Front vehicle is positioning for forced stop, probably similar complement. Ellie's analysis was professional, detached. "Our vehicle has reinforced frame and impact resistance. Their standard pickups don't. We have speed and maneuverability advantage. Recommendations? Aggressive countermeasures. Brake containment through forward engagement, then maximum acceleration to extraction point." Ellie reached beneath her seat, retrieving a compact device. This might help create confusion during the maneuver. Sarah recognized it as a modified signal jammer, military-grade, designed to disrupt radio communications within a limited radius. "Nice addition to the toolkit." "Naval intelligence teaches preparation," Ellie replied with grim humor. "Ready when you are." Sarah assessed timing and positioning, waiting until the road curved slightly to provide momentary concealment from the forward vehicle while maintaining visual contact. When conditions aligned, she executed a classic counter-ambush maneuver, rapid acceleration directly toward the blocking vehicle using superior momentum and the element of surprise to force the opponent into defensive positioning. The pickup ahead swerved instinctively as Sarah's SUV closed the distance at alarming speed, creating a gap that she exploited with precise steering. Ellie activated the signal jammer as they passed, disrupting any communication between the coordinated vehicles and their command structure. Behind them, the pursuing pickup attempted to maintain contact, but faltered during the unexpected maneuver, dropping back temporarily before resuming pursuit with increased aggression. The road straightened, offering clear visibility toward the airfield, now visible on the horizon and revealing another threat. A roadblock had been established a mile ahead. Two sheriff's department vehicles positioned across the narrow rural highway, officers deployed with weapons ready. The false officer down alert had generated the expected response from neighboring jurisdictions, creating exactly the expanded containment Rayburn had intended. Options, Sarah asked tersely, maintaining speed while calculating alternatives. Ellie studied the terrain with tactical assessment. Secondary road half a mile ahead, agricultural access, unpaved but navigable with our vehicle, adds distance but bypasses the roadblock. They'll pursue, counting on it, Ellie replied, a strategy clearly forming. The airfield has multiple access points. If we draw a pursuit along the secondary road, Reeves's team can secure the primary entrance for extraction. Sarah nodded, understanding the tactical logic. Creating a diversion to facilitate primary mission, objective classic. Military basics. Ellie agreed with a tight smile. Sometimes the oldest strategies are most effective. The agricultural access road appeared as described, unmarked, unpaved, but substantial enough for farm equipment and therefore navigable by their SUV. Sarah executed a rapid turn without slowing the vehicle's modified suspension, handling the transition from asphalt to dirt with minimal loss of control. Behind them, the pursuing pickup followed, now joined by one of the roadblock vehicles that had broken formation to engage. The trap was clear. Rayburn's allies would maintain the roadblock to prevent direct access to the airfield, while the pursuit force attempted to capture or eliminate Sarah and Ellie before they could reach federal protection. 2 miles to alternate airfield entrance. Ellie reported tracking their position against satellite mapping. Pursuit gaining but manageable with current velocity differential. Sarah maintained focus on the rough terrain, pushing the vehicle's capabilities without exceeding control limits. Dust billowed behind them, obscuring their immediate trail while marking their general direction, an acceptable compromise, given their strategic objective of drawing pursuit away from the primary extraction point. The satellite phone chirped with incoming communication. Ellie checked it immediately. Reeves confirms extraction team has secured runway aircraft on final approach. ETA 7 minutes to wheels down. We'll be cutting it close, Sarah observed, glancing at the pursuing vehicles, now visible as dust clouds in the distance. They're committing additional resources. Indeed, a third vehicle had joined the pursuit, a sheriff's SUV from another jurisdiction, lights flashing as it navigated the unpaved road. The false alert was generating exactly the response Rayburn had anticipated, creating a multi-agency pursuit that would require significant federal authority to override. Almost there, Ellie encouraged as the airfield's perimeter fence came into view ahead. Alternate entrance should be unlocked. Standard protocol for emergency services access. The entrance appeared as described, a chain-link gate secured with a standard padlock that proved minimal obstacle to Ellie's expertise. Within moments, they were through, navigating across the airfield's maintenance area toward the main runway, where a twin-engine aircraft was visible on final approach. Behind them, pursuit vehicles reached the gate, momentarily delayed by the resealed lock, buying precious seconds as Sarah and Ellie closed distance to the extraction point. Reeves and 2 additional agents had established a defensive perimeter near the runway, weapons ready, but not yet engaged. Federal agents, Reeves shouted as the pursuing vehicles finally breached the gate. Stand down immediately. This is a Drug Enforcement Administration operation. The lead sheriff's vehicle hesitated, clearly processing the unexpected federal presence. The Scorpion pickup showed no such restraint, accelerating directly towards Sarah and Ellie's position with clear intent. Cover, Sarah called, pulling Ellie toward the protection of concrete barriers positioned near the runway edge. They reached safety moments before the pickup roared past its occupants, clearly visible now. Marco, behind the wheel with a passenger Sarah didn't recognize, but whose weapon was unmistakable. Reeves and his agents responded with immediate but disciplined force, targeted fire directed at the pickup's engine block and tires rather than occupants. The vehicle swerved, then spun as bullets disabled critical systems, coming to rest at an awkward angle, with steam billowing from its punctured radiator. Federal agents, Reeves repeated, his voice carrying authority that finally penetrated the chaotic scene. All local law enforcement stand down or face federal charges for obstruction. The effect was immediate. Sheriff's deputies who had been advancing now froze, weapons lowered, as the reality of their situation became clear. Only Marco and his companion maintained resistance, barricaded behind their disabled vehicle while assessing escape options. Last chance, Reeves called to them. Surrender now or face additional charges. For a tense moment, the outcome remained uncertain. Then, recognizing the futility of their position, Marco's companion dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Marco followed suit seconds later, his expression a mixture of rage and calculation that suggested this surrender was tactical rather than sincere. As federal agents secured the Scorpion members, the aircraft completed its landing approach, taxiing toward the assembled group with practiced efficiency. The pilot maintained engine power ready for immediate departure once passengers were aboard. "Time to go," Reeves told Sarah and Ellie, gesturing toward the waiting aircraft. "My team will handle documentation and prisoner transfer. You'll be debriefed fully once we reach secure facilities." Sarah hesitated, surveying the scene with the assessment of someone accustomed to mission completion protocols. They had succeeded in their primary objective, securing evidence of corruption and ensuring its delivery to appropriate authorities. Yet the operation against Pine Ridge was just beginning, with Rayburn still in position to potentially destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses. "What about Pine Ridge?" she asked Reeves. "Rayburn will recognize what's happening as soon as word reaches him about federal intervention here. Task force is already deploying." Reeves assured her multiple federal agencies with sufficient manpower to secure all identified locations simultaneously. Evidence preservation is primary protocol. Ellie placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "We've done our part." Sarah lit the fuse. "Now it's time to let federal resources take over." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded, recognizing the logic even as her military training and personal investment urged continued engagement. They moved toward the aircraft, its door already open and ready to receive them. As they boarded, Sarah glanced back at the rural landscape beyond the airfield, rolling hills and scattered forests surrounding the small town where her father had lived and died. Pine Ridge wasn't visible from this distance, but she could imagine the scene unfolding there as federal agents descended on Rayburn the Scorpions and all who had participated in the corruption her father had died trying to expose. "He'd be proud," Ellie said quietly, following Sarah's gaze. "Your father. This is what he wanted: justice delivered properly through legitimate channels with evidence that will stand in court." 15 years later, Sarah replied, a mixture of satisfaction and lingering regret in her voice. "Some fights span generations." Ellie repeated her earlier observation. "Doesn't make victory any less meaningful when it comes." As the aircraft's door sealed and engines increased power for departure, Sarah settled into her seat, physically and emotionally exhausted, but carrying a sense of accomplishment that had eluded her through years of military service. This mission, unlike so many others with ambiguous results and questionable purpose, had clear meaning and unquestionable justification. Pine Ridge would face difficult times ahead as federal investigation exposed the full extent of corruption that had infected its institutions. But from that necessary reckoning might emerge something closer to the community her father had dedicated his life to, protecting a place where justice meant more than power, where law served citizens rather than criminals. The aircraft lifted off, banking gently toward Phoenix and the federal facilities where Sarah and Ellie would provide formal testimony. Below, the pursuit vehicles diminished to toy-like proportions, their occupants now beginning the long process of explaining their actions to increasingly suspicious federal agents. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of reflection. The path from vandalized truck to federal witness protection had been neither planned nor straightforward, yet somehow felt inevitable, as if her military career had been preparation for this final mission, honoring her father's legacy. Whatever came next, testimony, rebuilding, eventual return to civilian life elsewhere, would build upon this foundation. For the first time since receiving news of her father's death 15 years earlier, Sarah felt a sense of completion, of promises fulfilled and obligations honored. Pine Ridge had taken her father and her childhood home. But in return, Sarah Colton had delivered something more powerful than revenge: justice served with the precision and determination of a soldier who had trained her entire life for this moment of truth. The Phoenix Federal Building hummed with activity as Sarah sat in a secure conference room recounting her experiences for the third time. 2 days had passed since their extraction from the airfield, during which she and Ellie had been separated for individual debriefing, standard protocol to ensure testimony, consistency without coordination. "And you're certain Sheriff Rayburn personally attended the lumber mill operation?" asked Special Agent Teresa Vasquez, the lead federal prosecutor assigned to the case. "Positive," Sarah confirmed, indicating the relevant section of video evidence displayed on the conference room screen. This footage clearly shows him conferring with the Scorpion leadership and Deputy Henderson regarding the shipment. Vasquez nodded, making another notation in her already extensive file. At 45, she projected the confident competence of someone who had built multiple successful cases against organized crime. Your documentation is remarkably thorough, Miss Colton. Combined with Miss Carter's electronic surveillance and the historical records from your father and Deputy Martinez, we have sufficient evidence for federal indictments against 19 individuals so far. Any word on the Pine Ridge operation? Sarah asked the question that had dominated her thoughts since arriving in Phoenix. Partially successful, Vasquez replied, her expression suggesting professional frustration. The lumber mill was secured intact with substantial evidence. Multiple Scorpion members were arrested, including their regional lieutenant. Several local officials as well, including 2 county commissioners and a judge who had dismissed previous cases. But Sheriff Rayburn and Mayor Phillips received warning. Somehow, both had disappeared by the time federal agents reached their locations. Vasquez's frown deepened. We've issued warrants and established monitoring on all known associates, but they have gone to ground effectively. The news wasn't entirely surprising. Both Rayburn and Phillips had law enforcement backgrounds and connections, giving them access to resources and protocols for evading capture. Still, their escape meant the operation remained incomplete, with the primary architects of Pine Ridge's corruption still at large. What about Bobby Deputy Henderson? In custody, Vasquez confirmed attempting to negotiate terms in exchange for cooperation, though his credibility is compromised by his earlier deception regarding Martinez's evidence. Sarah absorbed this update, her tactical mind already processing implications. Rayburn and Phillips on the run, potentially with access to Scorpion resources beyond Pine Ridge. Bobby in custody but unreliable. The operation had crippled the visible infrastructure, but hadn't yet reached the leadership responsible for her father's death. We'll find them, Vasquez assured her, noting Sarah's expression. Federal resources are substantially greater than anything they can access, especially now that their local power base has been eliminated. Well, they've evaded justice for 15 years, Sarah pointed out. They're adaptable, connected, and desperate. That combination makes them dangerous, particularly to potential witnesses, which is why you and Ms. Carter remain in protective custody, Vasquez reminded her. Your testimony is essential for successful prosecution of those we've already apprehended, and potentially critical for identifying Rayburn and Phillips when they're located. The subtle emphasis on when rather than if reflected professional confidence rather than absolute certainty. Both women recognized the reality fugitives with law enforcement backgrounds and criminal connections could remain hidden for extended periods, especially with sufficient financial resources. After completing her latest deposition, Sarah was escorted to a different section of the building where Ellie waited in a similar conference room, her injured arm now properly treated and bandaged by federal medical staff. You look better, Sarah observed as the door closed, leaving them momentarily unsupervised. Amazing what actual medical care can accomplish, Ellie replied with a hint of her usual dry humor. How was round 3 with Vasquez? Thorough, professional. Sarah took the seat opposite her ally. Rayburn and Phillips are still missing. I heard not surprising given their backgrounds and connections. Ellie studied Sarah with the perceptive assessment that had characterized their alliance from the beginning. You're thinking about what happens next, aren't you? This isn't finished while they're free. The federal task force has resources we can't match, Sarah. This phase is best handled by professionals with jurisdiction and authority, and the same professionals who failed to intervene for 15 years despite Martinez's evidence, Sarah countered. The same system that allowed Rayburn to transfer back to Pine Ridge after my father's death without investigation. Ellie sighed, acknowledging the point without conceding the argument. Bureaucratic failure doesn't negate the fact that we've done our part. The evidence is secured, federal prosecution is proceeding, and the Pine Ridge operation has been dismantled. That's significant progress. It's incomplete, Sarah insisted. Rayburn and Phillips ordered my father's execution. They killed Martinez when he continued the investigation. They're the architects of everything that happened to Pine Ridge. As long as they're free, there's no justice. Before Ellie could respond, the door opened to admit David Reeves, the DEA contact who had coordinated their extraction. His expression suggested news rather than standard debriefing. We have a development, he announced without preamble. Henderson's talking finally, providing information about Rayburn and Phillips' contingency protocols. Both women straightened attention focused. What kind of protocols? Sarah asked. Predetermined rendezvous locations, communication channels, resource caches, standard fugitive preparation, but specific to their operation. Reeves consulted his tablet. Most significantly, Henderson claims they maintained a secondary facility outside federal jurisdiction across the border in Mexico. Smart, Ellie observed. Extradition becomes complicated, especially with potential cartel connections offering protection. Exactly our concern, Reeves confirmed. We're coordinating with Mexican authorities, but the location Henderson provided is in a region with significant cartel influence. Official cooperation will be limited. Sarah processed this information with military assessment. You're saying they might remain beyond reach indefinitely if they reach this location. It's a possibility we're working to prevent. Reeves acknowledged, Border Patrol has been alerted additional resources deployed to likely crossing points. But Henderson indicates they've used this route previously, have established procedures and assistance on both sides. The implications settled in the room like a physical presence. If Rayburn and Phillips reached their Mexican sanctuary, the likelihood of successful capture diminished significantly. The primary architects of Pine Ridge's corruption and her father's murder might escape meaningful consequence, despite all they had accomplished. Henderson mentioned something else. Reeves continued after a moment. A final meeting scheduled with their primary cartel contact, someone he called the facilitator, before crossing. Apparently, this individual has coordinated their drug distribution operations for years, including during your father's investigation. Sarah's pulse quickened. When and where? Tonight, a property near the border called Rancho Dorado, approximately 4 hours from Phoenix. Reeves's expression turned carefully neutral. Henderson claims this facilitator was directly involved in arranging your father's elimination when his investigation threatened their operation. The information landed with the impact of physical force. Not just Rayburn and Phillips, but the actual facilitator of her father's murder. All potentially in one location within reach of justice, if the opportunity could be seized. You're mobilizing an operation, Ellie asked, her tone, suggesting she already anticipated the answer. Complicated jurisdictional situation. Reeves replied with evident frustration. Rancho Dorado sits in a legal gray area technically within U.S. territory, but with disputed boundary claims that Mexican authorities sometimes contest. Federal warrant execution requires diplomatic coordination that takes time we don't have. By the time official channels clear the operation, the meeting will be concluded and all parties likely across the border. Sarah understood the subtext immediately. You're telling us this without official authorization. Reeves maintained professional composure, but his eyes conveyed what his words couldn't explicitly state. I'm providing case-relevant information to protected witnesses. My obligation extends to transparency regarding developments that might impact your security status. The deliberate ambiguity was itself a message, an experienced federal agent creating plausible deniability while conveying actionable intelligence. Whether from professional frustration with bureaucratic constraints or personal conviction regarding justice, Reeves was providing an opportunity without officially endorsing action. When do we return to debriefing? Ellie asked, following the unspoken protocol. Not until tomorrow morning, Reeves replied evenly. Agent Vasquez has meetings regarding interstate coordination. Security detail has been reduced due to resource allocation toward border operations. He placed his tablet on the conference table screen, displaying a map with Rancho Dorado clearly marked. For your information only, of course. With that, he departed, leaving Sarah and Ellie alone with the implicit choice he had presented: remain in protective custody while bureaucracy potentially allowed her father's killers to escape justice, or act on the intelligence provided without official sanction. He's giving us an opportunity, Sarah stated once the door closed. While maintaining deniability, Ellie agreed. Smart play. If we succeed, federal authorities get their targets without jurisdictional complications. If we fail, we're rogue actors who ignored protection protocols, no official involvement. Sarah studied the map. Reeves had deliberately left accessible. 4 hours to the ranch, another hour to the border crossing. Henderson identified timing would be tight. This isn't our fight anymore, Sarah, Ellie said, though her tone lacked conviction. We've done what we came to do. Secured evidence, initiated federal prosecution, exposed the operation. It was always my fight, Sarah replied quietly, from the moment they killed my father. Everything else, military service, the years away, was just postponing the inevitable. And if we're caught outside protective custody, all the evidence we provided becomes vulnerable to procedural challenges. Defense attorneys will claim witness tampering, unauthorized operations, contaminated chains of custody. If Rayburn and Phillips escape to Mexico with this facilitator, none of that matters. The primary perpetrators remain free while foot soldiers take the fall. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. My father deserves better. Martinez deserves better. Pine Ridge deserves better. Ellie studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Naval intelligence teaches risk assessment. This is high risk, potentially high reward, with significant probability of negative outcomes regardless of primary mission success. A hint of her characteristic dry humor emerged. Exactly the kind of operation they warned us to avoid, then trained us to execute perfectly. You don't have to come, Sarah said, acknowledging the choice. You've already risked everything getting the evidence to federal authorities. Please, Ellie scoffed. You think I'm letting you face those bastards alone after everything that's happened? Her expression sobered. Besides, I've got scores of my own to settle. My father didn't die, but they took his livelihood, his dignity, made me complicit in their operations to protect him. She nodded toward the tablet. What's the plan? They spent the next hour analyzing the information Reeves had provided, developing a tactical approach that maximized their limited resources while accounting for multiple contingencies. The federal building's security protocols were substantial, but designed primarily to prevent unauthorized entry, rather than exit, particularly for protected witnesses rather than prisoners. Using Ellie's technical expertise and Sarah's tactical training, they identified a viable departure route through maintenance areas during shift change, when monitoring would be temporarily disrupted by personnel transitions. Transportation presented a greater challenge until Ellie noticed vehicle requisition forms on Reeves's tablet, including a field operations SUV scheduled for deployment, but not yet assigned to a specific agent. He's thought of everything, she observed, giving us the tools without explicit authorization. Plausible deniability maintained at every step, Sarah agreed. Smart operator. By late afternoon, their plan was finalized. They would exit during the 6 to 11 p.m. shift, access the vehicle using the authorization code visible in Reeves's documentation, and proceed to Rancho Dorado with sufficient time to establish surveillance before the scheduled midnight meeting. After that, circumstances would dictate their approach, observation, and documentation. If federal authorities arrived in time, direct intervention if necessary to prevent escape. One final question, Ellie said as they prepared for implementation. If we encounter Rayburn Phillips and this facilitator directly, what's your objective? Capture for federal prosecution or something more permanent? The question cut to the core of Sarah's motivation. Justice versus revenge, legal process versus personal retribution. Her military training emphasized lawful engagement according to established rules, while her personal grief demanded more definitive resolution. Capture if possible, she decided after careful consideration. They deserve to face the system they corrupted, to have their crimes exposed through due process. That's what my father would have wanted. She met Ellie's gaze directly. But they're fugitives wanted for multiple homicides, including law enforcement officers. If they resist with deadly force, defensive engagement authorized. Ellie finished the military phrasing, acknowledging legitimate justification for lethal response if circumstances demanded. The execution of their departure proceeded with the precision of a well-planned military operation. The shift change created exactly the momentary surveillance gap they had anticipated, allowing them to access the maintenance corridor and proceed to the parking structure without interception. The vehicle requisition code functioned as documented, providing transportation with federal markings that would facilitate their movement through potential checkpoints. As Sarah navigated Phoenix traffic toward the interstate, Ellie monitored communications channels using the vehicle's secure system, confirming no immediate alert regarding their unauthorized departure. Either monitoring had failed to detect their absence during the shift transition, or more likely someone was deliberately delaying notification to provide operational advantage. Reeves is putting his career at risk, Ellie observed as they merged onto the highway. If this goes sideways, he'll face serious consequences for the convenient lapses in security and coincidental access to operational intelligence. He believes in justice over procedure, Sarah replied. Like my father, like Martinez. The journey to Rancho Dorado took them through progressively remote terrain, Arizona desert giving way to scrubland, punctuated by rocky outcroppings as they approached the border region. Traffic thinned, then disappeared entirely. leaving them alone on a two-lane highway that paralleled the international boundary just miles to the south. Dusk settled into full darkness as they left the highway for a series of unmarked access roads, following the coordinates Reeves had provided. The ranch materialized from the desert like a mirage, a sprawling property centered around a hacienda-style main house with satellite structures creating a compound protected by terrain as much as by physical security. Sarah parked a mile from the property's main entrance, positioning their vehicle in a natural depression that provided concealment while maintaining sightlines to approach routes. Using the operation-grade binoculars from the SUV's equipment cache, they conducted initial surveillance, confirming active security that suggested preparation for significant visitors. 4 perimeter guards, Ellie reported after completing her assessment. Standard patrol, pattern with overlapping fields of vision. 2 vehicles parked near the main structure, neither matching descriptions for Rayburn or Phillips. Likely resident security. Communications antenna active, suggesting coordination capabilities. Defensive positioning, but not excessive for a remote property in this region, Sarah observed, designed to detect casual intrusion, not repel a coordinated assault, consistent with a location used for discrete meetings rather than permanent operations. They established an observation position on a ridge overlooking the ranch, using natural features for concealment, while maintaining visual contact with both the main structure and primary approach routes. As the appointed meeting time approached, activity at the ranch increased additional security, taking positions. Lighting adjusted to illuminate potential approaches while maintaining central areas in deliberate shadow. Professional setup, Ellie murmured, adjusting her night vision equipment. Not cartel foot soldiers or local muscle. These are trained operators with tactical experience. Sarah nodded, recognizing the disciplined positioning and communication protocols that indicated security provided by former military or law enforcement personnel, a common pattern in high-level criminal enterprises that could afford quality protection. At 11:38 p.m., headlights appeared on the access road, approaching with the deliberate pace of someone familiar with the property rather than a first-time visitor. The vehicle, a luxury SUV with tinted windows, passed through the security perimeter without challenge, proceeding directly to the main house, where a figure emerged to greet its occupants. That's Phillips, Sarah confirmed, recognizing the mayor's distinctive build despite the distance. Can't see who's with him yet. A second vehicle appeared 7 minutes later, following the same approach pattern and receiving similar clearance. This one Sarah identified immediately, Rayburn's personal vehicle rather than a department SUV, selected for anonymity during escape. Both primary targets confirmed on site. Ellie updated their status. No sign of federal response units on any approach vector. We're on our own for now. Sarah continued observation as both Rayburn and Phillips were escorted inside the main house, presumably to meet with the mysterious facilitator who had coordinated their criminal enterprise for years, the same individual implicated in arranging her father's murder. Decision point, Ellie said quietly. Do we maintain surveillance and hope federal assets arrive before they conclude their business? Or do we engage directly to prevent potential escape? The tactical calculation was complex. Direct engagement with their limited resources against professional security presented significant risk, potentially jeopardizing both mission success and personal survival. However, waiting for federal response that might never materialize could allow all targets to escape across the nearby border, effectively ending any possibility of justice. Sarah was formulating her response when unexpected movement caught her attention, a figure approaching, their position from behind. Using terrain features for concealment, but visible through her peripheral awareness, she signaled Ellie with a silent hand gesture, both women adjusting position to address the potential threat while maintaining observation of the ranch. Federal agents, came a whispered voice. Friendly approach. Sarah maintained tactical readiness, but allowed the figure to advance, revealing David Reeves accompanied by a second agent, both in tactical gear rather than standard field attire. Thought you might be here, Reeves said as he reached their position. Though official documentation will indicate you remained in protective custody throughout this operation. Unauthorized surveillance only, Sarah replied, understanding the continuation of deniable protocol. No engagement plan without federal authorization. Of course, Reeves acknowledged the fiction with professional courtesy. Agent Vasquez accelerated jurisdictional clearance after reviewing additional evidence from Henderson's cooperation. Official operation is now authorized with assault teams approaching from multiple vectors. He checked his tactical equipment. ETA 12 minutes to perimeter establishment, 3 additional minutes to coordinated entry. Rayburn and Phillips are both inside, Ellie reported, maintaining observation of the ranch. Unknown number of additional subjects, minimum 8 security personnel with tactical positioning. Reeves nodded, unsurprised by their thoroughness. Primary objective is subject apprehension for federal prosecution. Facilitator identification is secondary priority. First confirmed intelligence on their cartel liaison in 15 years of investigation. The parameters were clear. Federal operation proceeding with official sanction with Sarah and Ellie's presence acknowledged but undocumented. They would observe but not engage unless circumstances demanded immediate response to preserve evidence or prevent escape. For the next 10 minutes, they maintained joint surveillance as federal assets moved into position with professional discipline, establishing a perimeter that would prevent departure once the operation commenced. Then, just as the assault team leader signaled readiness for coordinated entry movement at the ranch's southern boundary attracted Sarah's attention. Vehicle approaching from the south, she reported, adjusting her night vision equipment. No headlights off-road capable approaching from Mexican side of the territorial boundary. Reeves immediately relayed this information to the operation commander, receiving confirmation that no federal assets were approaching from that vector. Potential exit strategy, he concluded. Subject extraction rather than scheduled arrival. The implications were immediate and concerning. If Rayburn Phillips and the facilitator had prepared an escape route bypassing established border checkpoints, the entire federal operation might secure the facility only to find primary targets already departed. Permission to intercept the approaching vehicle. Sarah requested military protocol, asserting itself in the operational environment. Prevent potential subject extraction before main assault commences. Reeves hesitated visibly, calculating professional requirements against operational necessities. Negative, he decided finally. Maintain position and continue observation. Federal assets will adjust to address the new approach vector. But even as he spoke, the operation timeline collapsed. Within the ranch compound, security personnel suddenly adopted alert postures, suggesting internal communication about potential compromise. Lights extinguished in coordinated sequence, indicating preparation for rapid departure rather than standard security protocol. They've been warned, Ellie assessed immediately, someone on the inside or monitoring communication frequencies. The approaching vehicle accelerated, now clearly visible as a modified all-terrain transport capable of navigating the challenging border terrain without established crossing points. Its trajectory would intersect with the ranch's southern boundary precisely where a concealed gate was now opening in the perimeter fencing. Operation compromised, Reeves reported into his communication system. Commence immediate assault priority on subject containment. Federal agents responded with professional efficiency, accelerating their approach timeline and adapting to the changed circumstances. But tactical reality remained unchanged. The southern extraction route had been prepared in advance, with the approaching vehicle now less than a minute from the rendezvous point where Rayburn Phillips and potentially the facilitator would attempt escape. Sarah made her decision in the compressed moment between identification and response, the same rapid assessment that had guided her through multiple combat scenarios during military service. Without verbal communication, she signaled her intent to Ellie, who acknowledged with the subtle nod of someone who had come to the same conclusion independently. We're moving to intercept the extraction vehicle, Sarah informed Reeves, already in motion toward their concealed SUV. Federal assault will secure the compound, but primary targets are attempting escape via pre-established route. Interception is necessary to prevent cross-border extraction. Reeves's expression reflected professional conflict official protocol versus operational necessity, formal constraints against practical requirements. Civilian interference in federal operations is explicitly prohibited. He stated for the record, then added, communications to Channel 7 remains accessible if supporting assets require positional updates from field observers. The tacit authorization was sufficient. Sarah and Ellie moved with coordinated purpose to their vehicle, accelerating toward an intercept position that would allow them to disrupt the extraction without directly engaging the ranch compound, where federal agents were now initiating their assault. Behind them, the synchronized breach of federal forces created a momentary diversion. Flashbangs and entry charges providing sensory overload to security personnel, while tactical teams established control of access points. But Sarah's focus remained on the southern boundary, where 3 figures were now visible, moving rapidly toward the extraction vehicle that had reached the perimeter gate. Rayburn confirmed. Ellie reported as they closed distance. Phillips alongside third subject unidentified, possibly the facilitator. Sarah navigated the difficult terrain with the skill of someone trained in tactical driving, calculating intersect trajectories while maintaining operational awareness. The extraction vehicle had passed through the gate, pausing briefly to admit the escaping figures before accelerating toward the territorial boundary just minutes away. Federal units unable to pursue, came Reeves's voice through the communication system. Compound resistance requiring full resource commitment. Extraction vehicle will cross boundary in approximately 3 minutes if unchallenged. Understood. Sarah acknowledged, adjusting their approach angle to create maximum disruption with minimum risk. Rather than attempting direct interception, which would place them between the extraction vehicle and the territorial boundary, she opted for a flanking maneuver that would force adjustment in their escape route while maintaining pursuit capability. The extraction vehicle's driver detected their approach, increasing speed across the uneven terrain while adjusting course away from the clearest path to the boundary. Sarah matched the adaptation using her SUV's superior handling to narrow distance despite the challenging conditions. 500 meters to territorial boundary. Ellie updated their status. After that, direct interdiction becomes diplomatically complex. The reality narrowed their options to a single tactical approach: disable the extraction vehicle before it reached the boundary, or lose their opportunity to prevent escape. Sarah pushed their SUV to maximum sustainable speed across the rough terrain, closing distance through superior driving skill rather than vehicle capability. As they drew within range, the extraction vehicle's security element responded a figure leaning from the passenger window with a weapon that could only be identified by its muzzle flash as rounds impacted around their SUV. Sarah maintained course while executing evasive adjustments, using terrain features for partial cover while continuing pursuit. Armed resistance confirmed, she reported through the communication channel, continuing interdiction attempt within territorial boundaries. The extraction vehicle was now just 300 meters from the border, its path taking it toward a dry riverbed that marked the technical boundary between nations. Once across, even federal agents would require Mexican authorization to continue pursuit, authorization that would never arrive in time given the region's cartel influence. Sarah made her final tactical decision, accelerating directly toward the extraction vehicle's rear quarter panel, a precision collision that would disable their transport without catastrophic impact that might prevent subject apprehension. Ellie braced for contact weapon, ready to address immediate threats upon disabled vehicle containment. The impact occurred precisely as calculated, sufficient force to destabilize the extraction vehicle's suspension without triggering airbag deployment. In either transport, the target vehicle slewed sideways momentum, carrying it into a controlled roll that terminated against a natural embankment 50 meters from the territorial boundary. Sarah brought their SUV to a controlled stop, both women deploying with tactical discipline to establish containment of the disabled vehicle. From the compound behind them, the sounds of the federal operation continued. Controlled detonations and sporadic weapons fire suggesting resistance was being systematically overcome. Federal agents, Sarah called toward the overturned extraction vehicle, adopting the protocol that would maintain legal standing for their interdiction. Exit the vehicle with hands visible. Movement from the wreckage indicated survivors, one figure emerging from the driver's side, another from the rear passenger compartment. The driver, visibly armed, took a defensive position, using the vehicle for cover while assessing their situation. Rayburn Phillips, federal warrants authorize your immediate apprehension. Sarah continued, maintaining position behind their SUV's engine block. Surrender now to prevent escalation. The response came in the form of suppressive fire, the driver attempting to create space for the passenger to continue toward the boundary on foot. Sarah and Ellie held position, returning disciplined fire aimed at containment rather than elimination, maintaining the legal parameters of a federal detainment operation despite their unofficial status. The tactical engagement continued for approximately 40 seconds, each side attempting to establish advantage, while federal resources remained committed to the main compound. Then a third figure emerged from the extraction vehicle, not attempting escape, but moving with the deliberate purpose of someone implementing a secondary protocol. Even at this distance, in the limited visibility of desert night, Sarah recognized the distinctive movement and bearing Mayor Phillips, the man whose political career had been built on the corruption her father had died trying to expose James Phillips. She called specifically identifying the subject for legal record. Federal warrants require your immediate surrender. Compliance now will be noted in subsequent proceedings. Phillips paused, apparently calculating options given the tactical situation. His next action demonstrated the risk assessment of someone with both law enforcement background and criminal enterprise experience. He raised his hands in apparent surrender, then used the temporary adjustment in Sarah and Ellie's focus to draw a concealed weapon from his ankle holster. The resulting exchange occurred with the compressed timeline of close-quarters combat, Phillips firing first with the desperate inaccuracy of someone attempting to create escape opportunity rather than eliminate threats. Sarah and Ellie responding with the disciplined precision of their military training. Phillips collapsed his weapon, discharging a final round skyward as a neuromuscular control failed. The driver witnessing this outcome immediately adjusted his tactical approach, dropping his weapon and assuming a surrender position that indicated clear understanding of changed circumstances. "Federal agents, hold your position," came a new voice from behind Sarah and Ellie, the assault team leader having diverged from the main operation upon securing the compound. "We'll take custody of subjects from here."